Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics, back with the fanfiction. This is the series of What If Luffy, Ace and Sabo, raised and trained by Whitebeard. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Three young boys looked around the ship. There were bodies lying all over the deck, battered and bloodied. Are there any more hiding somewhere? The blonde child asked. He was tired and just wanted to get back and get cleaned up. Or as clean as they could get anyway. They were all covered with specks of dried blood here and there, and the itch was starting to get on his nerves. That wasn't counting the dirt, grime, and sweat they've accumulated. No more, mumbled the youngest of the group. Let's go then, the older brunette said tiredly as he brought out a den mushy. The job didn't take them long, but they were hungry from not being fed enough. A small loaf of nearly moldy bread and a glass of water 2 times a day wasn't enough for the 3 growing boys. They walked on and over the bodies littering the deck of the ship as another ship pulled alongside, and they boarded. They were soon greeted by a large hairy man. Good job, the man sneered. You may go back to your room and rest. There will be another job for you in the morning. He laughed as he walked away. Their room, as it was called, was one of 4 cells within the bowels of the ship, with barely enough room for more than 3 full-grown men each. I wish this nightmare would just be over, grumbled the blonde once their guard left them, flopping onto the cold, hard cement floor. Me too, Sabo. Me too, grunted the older brunette as he made his way to a dark corner of their cell to grab the small water-filled bucket. Ace, hungry, whined the younger brunette. We are too, Luffy. Just deal with it. Let's just wash up and go to sleep. Maybe we can swipe some food tomorrow. Ace ruffled his little search brother's hair affectionately. Washing up consisted of just a bucket of dirty water and a dirty towel. At least they were able to get the blood off of them. Not much they could do with their clothes though. The next morning, they were so tired that they didn't realize a guard had opened their cell door and had to be woken up with a kick to the stomach each. They curled up and groaned in pain before they got up and followed the guard. It was the same every time they didn't wake up before the doors were opened. The guards never talked to them, unless it was to insult them. The 3 boys just learned not to listen and didn't bother talking to the guards. The hairy man from the day before, their current boss, greeted them in the debriefing room. Good morning, boys. I have great news for you. Today's job is just a simple kidnapping. Kidnapping is good, Ace thought to himself. That usually meant new clothes. New clothes meant they wouldn't get kicked out of restaurants for looking like sewer rats. Kidnapping also meant they had a few hours to themselves in a town without supervision, assuming they'd be dropped off at an inhabited island. Your target is this man. The guy shoved a picture in their faces. Be sure to erase all evidence. Don't let anyone see you and be done by noon. Remember, do not kill him. The man left the room, and a guard walked in with a new set of clothes for them and whatever tools they would need for the mission. Marco winced in pain as he opened his eyes. His head hurt like hell, and he felt like shit. He looked around and found himself in an empty cell. How did he land himself there? What happened? The last thing he remembered is eating at a restaurant on an island with a few of his fellow commanders. Then he remembered running after 3 kids who ate and ran out without paying. There was a little girl and 2 boys. He also remembered chasing them to the pier before they stopped and looked at him. And then what? Let's see. The girl turned to run up to him, looking oddly determined. Determined? What for? That was the last thing he remembered. By the pain on the back of his head, he was probably attacked from behind while he was distracted by the kids. He hoped the kids were okay. He shifted to a sitting position and found himself handcuffed with sea-stone. Well, that explained why he hurt. Pain is not something he'd felt in a long time. Whoever caught him must have been really good to be able to catch him off guard like he was. With nothing better to do, he just leaned back against the wall of his cell. Might as well wait and see who dared to mess with him and see what they wanted. The slight swaying of the cell told him that he was on a ship. He was sure Pops and his brothers would find him eventually. Then he heard yelling from down the hall. It didn't sound too far away. What do you mean we messed up? We caught him, didn't we? And no one saw us. Marco thought it strange that the person sounded young, so very young. You were seen. I heard you were chased after you ate and ran without paying. An older, deeper male voice sneered. You eat what I give you. You're not supposed to go out and do whatever you want. You would just draw unwanted attention. Take them away and teach them a lesson. No, Luffy, 2 young voices yelled. Marco watched as a man dragged 2 struggling and yelling boys to the cell across from his own. They were the boys who ate and ran with the little girl. Now he wondered where the girl had gone. The cell door slammed shut, and the boys reached out in between the bars to the man and yelled, Luffy, as agonizing screams were heard from somewhere further away on the ship. The 2 boys moved to lean against the wall and curled in on themselves, covering their ears as best they could to block out the sounds of painful screams. It went on and on before the screams finally stopped, and another man, in the same uniform as the one that brought the 2 boys earlier, carried in a small unconscious body and tossed it in with the boys, where it landed painfully loud on the solid concrete floor. Luffy. They both yelled in fear as they crawled over to inspect their companion. Marco recognized the dress. It was the girl who was with them earlier. No food for 3 days, was all the guard grunted with a bland expression as he turned to leave them. One boy quickly pulled out an emergency kit from a corner of their cell, as the other undressed the girl to patch her up. Only now, Marco could tell it was a boy, not a girl. He could also tell the kid was in bad condition from where he observed them quietly. Once they finished bandaging the poor kid, they sat there with their legs pulled up and stared at the boy. They weren't crying. Strange that. They looked like they wanted to cry. I see you were caught too, Yoi, Marco finally said, just wanting to fill the dreary silence. They both moved their eyes to glare at him. We weren't caught, you were, the brunette growled. We're the reason you're caught. The blonde's eyes looked at him tiredly and a little red. This is your fault, they both said as they went back to staring at their injured cellmate. I see, Marco said in understanding. Well, that was a good way to get anyone off guard. No one would normally suspect a bunch of kids, especially ones that young. Why didn't you just run away, Yoi, instead of going through all that trouble of clubbing me and bringing me here? The two boys pointed to the injured boy's left foot. Then he saw the bomb collar, a small one but a bomb nonetheless, on the boy's small ankle. He looked over the other two and saw that they didn't have one. That made a lot of sense. They seemed to be very close to each other. They used the small one as leverage against the older ones. That's how they punished them. They used the smaller one to get to the others. That just pissed Marco off. He really hoped his family finds him soon and give these bastards what they deserve. So how long have you been here, Yoi? Marco tried to get them to talk. Not being used to the quiet. He had a large family, so his home was never quiet. Why does it matter? The brunette huffed. You should worry about yourself, the blonde mumbled from behind his arms. Just thought we'd talk and forget about being here, Yoi, he offered. And Marco, Ace, grumbled the brunette hesitantly. Sabo, the blonde pointed to the injured boy. That's our brother, Luffy. Brothers. The three of them were brothers. How old are you? Ace glared at the man before he answered. We're 10. Luffy's 5. Probably. Sabo gave a small depreciating laugh. Those idiots tossed him in with us when he was still a baby that couldn't talk. All he did was giggle and make noises. We don't know anything about him other than his name. Marco gave a frown at that. How long have you kids been here? He asked again slowly, pretty sure he wouldn't like the answer. 5 years. The blonde boy's exhausted answer was even more muffled as he lowered his face into his arms. We're tired. We're going to sleep, Ace declared as he curled up next to Luffy with Sabo slowly doing the same on the other side. A few hours later, Ace heard the clanking of the cell door opening. He got up and woke Sabo up in the process, thinking they had another mission. Instead, they found a guard in the cell across from theirs with the prisoner. Oh, hey, Marco greeted the guard with a cheerful smile. Took you long enough to visit. I was starting to get lonely, Yoi. Shut up, the guard growled before thrusting a den mushy at Marco. Call your captain. You sure you want me to do that, Yoi? Just make the call. Marco shrugged and made the call. Who calls? The gruff voice on the other line answered, sounding put off. Hey, Pops. Marco, where are you? Thatch and Atmos just said you ran after some kids and never came back. The man on the other end sounded curious, rather than worried. Would you believe I got caught and am now a prisoner, Yoi? Marco smiled at the den mushy. Kurarara, the older man laughed. Is that so? They haven't harmed you, have they, my son? No, not a hair. Though, I may need a doctor or 3, Yoi, Marco said, eyeing the boy lying on the ground. The kid looked like he was having a hard time breathing. The man on the other end hummed in concern. Then, what do they want? The guard grabbed the den mushy. We want you in exchange for him. Is that so? All right, then. Where would you like to meet? The guard rattled off a destination and hung up before he left. You don't seem too concerned, Ace said when he was sure the guard was too far away to hear them. No, Pops will take care of them, Yoi. Marco waved it off. They're messing with the wrong person. That must be nice, to have someone come get you back, Sabo said wistfully. Don't worry, I'll make sure you'll be freed from here, too, Yoi. Marco gave them a warm smile. Right, don't get your hopes up. Ace went back to laying down next to Luffy. He ran his hand through the younger boy's hair in worry before bringing the boy's head closer to his chest and closed his eyes. There was nothing else to do but to lay there. Luffy wasn't up. There was no one to play with, no one to teach of the outside world, no one to tell stories to. That's all Ace and Sabo could do. There's nothing else in their empty cell. With Luffy out of commission, they just lay there with nothing to do. To them, Luffy is their world, a baby that was suddenly thrust at them to take care of. A small, tiny being that knew nothing of this terrible world that rejects them. Luffy is theirs. They want to protect him, but there was no hope for them ever leaving. If they left, there would be no one to watch over Luffy. The next day, before the guard was able to kick them awake, Ace and Sabo got up to protect Luffy from the expected kick. The guard scoffed at them and told them to follow him. The man then went to unlock the other cell and told their prisoner to follow as well. The guard led them up to the open deck, where about 20 armed men and their leader stood in wait. Their leader didn't even acknowledge them. "You two are to watch this man. Do not let him go until we have their captain," the guard told the kids. "And remember, if a fight breaks out, you are to protect me, otherwise." He-Man trailed off, knowing the boys would get the hint. He handed the boys a pistol and a small dagger each. The boys didn't say anything. They just took the offered weapons and placed them in their belts where they usually carried their weapons and just stood there, expressionless as they gave in to their fate. They had left Luffy in their cell alone. He was still unconscious when they left him. Hopefully, they'd be done and back before the boy woke up. Marco saw the two boys eye the leader's hand that was playing with a device of some sort. It must be the device for the bomb. Too bad the man was too far away. If he was closer, then he'd have a better chance to make a grab for it. He smiled when a familiar whale figurehead sailed closer. The large ship anchored right next to the ship they were on. Whitebeard stood atop the figurehead and examined Marco, glad to see his son unharmed, though he was concerned about the doctor comment. He had all their doctors in their station and ready for anything just in case. The rest of Whitebeard's crew stood at attention on the ship with their weapons drawn. Ace and Sabo's eyes went wide at the sight. Why didn't the idiot leader tell the man to come alone? "I don't think even Lu can take on that many people," Ace whispered to Sabo. Sabo nodded in agreement before a thought entered his mind. "Hey, you," Sabo hissed quietly, not wanting the leader to hear. Marco nodded slightly to let the boy know he's listening. "You said you'd free us too. Can you really do it? If not all three of us, at least Luffy." "Please," Sabo whispered. The blonde man only smirked confidently in response. The large, intimidating figure on the other ship laughed. "I thank you for keeping my son in one piece. Now, what is it you want from me?" The grin never left the man's face as if he wasn't dealing with an enemy. "Your head, of course. If I can give your head to the young master, then I'll finally be recognized as part of the family." The leader laughed loudly. "Unless you want your precious commander dead, you will give yourself to us." Taking his cue, Ace cocked his pistol and pointed it at Marco's side. He'd aim for the head, but the man was a lot taller than he is, and with that angle, he wouldn't be able to hit his target if he had to kill him. Whitebeard narrowed his eyes at that and looked at Marco. His son just eyed him steadily, relaying a silent message to his father figure. The large man nodded, which a guard took as an agreement, and walked up to Whitebeard with a sea stone cuff. Marco used that as a distraction and shot his leg out and swiped Ace's legs out from under him and dodged as the pistol went off. Then all hell broke loose as if the sound of the shot fired was the signal for the start of the battle. The men from Whitebeard's ship dropped down in droves onto the smaller ship and a battle ensued. Marco took that moment to use his remaining strength to knock out both boys so they wouldn't have to fight. The sea stone cuffs were taking a toll on him. Marco, a tall man with a light brown hair done up in a pompadour, ran up to him with a sword in one hand. "Thatch, we need to get a remote from that man, Yoy," Marco explained to his friend urgently. "He might have the key to this too." He shook his confined wrists. Thatch looked confused for a moment before he shrugged and took off. Marco looked around at the one-sided battle, mildly surprised that no one was even bothering with him. It was pretty sad, really. It had been only 5 minutes, and there were only a handful of enemies left. He called out to the closest member of his division to take the two boys to Moby Dick, so they'd be safe and out of the way. Thatch had easily taken down the leader not minutes later and ran back over with a set of keys and the bomb release. "What's this for?" Thatch showed him the small device as Marco rubbed his free wrists, feeling whole again. "The reason why I wish I was the one to kill that bastard," Marco growled. He looked around and saw that the battle is already over and his siblings cheering as they made their way back to their ship. There was nothing left for him to do here, so he walked back down to the cell area, with Thatch following. "I'll be right back, Yoy," the first commander called over to his captain. As soon as Thatch saw the body of a naked and poorly bandaged young boy, he sucked in his breath. "What the fuck is going on here?" Marco opened up the cell and tested every key he had to take off the bomb anklet. "They've been using this boy to get those other two to do their bidding. This here," he took off the anklet and waved it in front of Thatch, "is a bomb collar, Yoy, just one small enough for the ankle. I'm hoping the other two boys will have more answers. Seems this one's been here since before he could properly speak, Yoy." "Fuck," took the word right out of my mouth. Marco carefully cradled Luffy to his chest, noticing that each movement caused the boy to twitch in pain. They boarded Moby Dick, where everyone was ready and waiting for them to return before raising anchor and leaving the place. He walked past his captain wordlessly towards the infirmary, only giving a slight nod in acknowledgement. Whitebeard frowned at the state of the young child. So that was what he needed the doctors for. It was a good thing they had a skilled pediatrician on board. He quickly gave orders to depart before he went to his room to wait for Marco to come by and give his report. Marco was glad to see the two older boys conscious by the time he had Luffy settled and in a bed in the infirmary. It took some time, but he was able to assure the two children that they were finally free, and that Luffy will be taken care of, before he gestured for them to follow him. Ace and Sabo turned to give their brother one last look before leaving the room. Once they entered Whitebeard's room, the two boys looked at the large man with wide, fearful eyes. They knew who he was. They've seen his wanted poster, but they didn't think they'd actually meet the strongest man in the world, nor that he was this big. Now what have they gotten themselves into? Whitebeard laughed. There's nothing to be afraid of. I'm not going to eat you. I just have some questions for you. They answered the questions as best they could. There was no need to anger the strongest man in the world. They couldn't die there. They have a younger brother to take care of. A younger brother that needed them. A brother that knew nothing of the outside world. Who knew what these people would do to their brother if they weren't there to watch over him. If they didn't have Luffy to care for. Sabo knew for certain Ace would have taken this chance to defeat the man known to rival Gaul. Roger, just to make his mark in the world as his own person and not just that man's son. They may be stronger than your average kids. But even then, they were just kids. Even Ace knew they were no match for the man before them. They told him about how they were kidnapped while out hunting on Dawn Island. How Luffy was just dumped on them to care for when he was a small baby. How they were forced to do random odd jobs for those people. Then how they were forced to kill people for them because kids are unsuspecting. Then how they had to take Luffy with them on those jobs once he was able to walk without tripping over his own feet. They had to teach Luffy to defend himself because the jobs got harder and harder for them to protect him. If they didn't want to do something, the men would take it out on the younger boy to punish them. They'd been passed around to different ships to work for different people. The last guy was the worst, always beating Luffy to the point that he couldn't walk. The last job was the first time they messed up by getting noticed doing their usual dine and dash, and the first time Luffy had been beaten that badly. They gave Marco a glare for messing up their plan and getting them in trouble. Yeah, sorry about that, Yoi. Marco looked away from the glare as he rubbed the back of his head in shame. So, about this young master that guy was talking about, you wouldn't happen to know who that is, would you, Yoi? Ace and Sabo paused at that. They know who the young master is. They'd never met the man before, but they had heard talks around the ships they were kept on. Ace paused before he answered as if the person wasn't anyone important, some guy they call Joker. Shit, Marco hissed to himself, causing the two boys to flinch at the way it was said. Indeed, Joker, also known as Doflamingo, is a pirate that works for the government, part of the 7 warlords. He's not someone we should pick a fight with without reason. Whitebeard sighed at the information given. Is there anywhere you want to go? Any family waiting for you? We can even take you back to Dawn if you'd like, Yoi, Marco offered. They both shook their head. You can just drop us off at the next island, Sabo said. We don't really have anyone waiting for us, but we can take care of ourselves. It'd be safer for them to stay away from Dawn. They would only cause a commotion if they showed up after being gone for so long. He wasn't lying when he told them there wasn't anyone waiting for them. He was sure Datten and her gang and Makino thought they were dead. Whitebeard gave it some thought before voicing it out loud. Why don't you stay here with us for the time being? At least until we figure out what to do with you. Just then they heard a few people yelling outside the door. They all quickly went to check what the commotion was. Ace and Sabo were the first to notice a small bandaged figure weave in and out of the legs that were in its way. Luffy, they called out in horror. The small figure froze and turned his head to their voices. As soon as he found his brothers, he dropped the small knife he had in his hand and ran up to them, crying silently in their arms. He had learned that if he wanted to cry, he had to do it quietly, or he would get hurt, and his brothers wouldn't like that. They said it hurt them to see him hurt. He didn't want them to hurt. Luffy, these people saved us. Don't attack them, Sabo admonished softly as he rubbed the boy's back. Marco smiled at them before crouching to reach their eye level. Hey there, brat, he greeted the youngest. Shouldn't you still be resting in the infirmary, Yoi? He pointed to the blood seeping through the bandages. Luffy griped his brother's shirts in fear. He recognized this man. This was the man they kidnapped. He didn't understand what was going on. The last thing he remembered was being beaten because he ate yummy food. Then he woke up in an unknown place where this strange lady tried to attack him. Luffy, this is Marco, Sabo introduced. He helped us. Tell him thank you. He gently pushed his little brother off them and turned the boy to face the older blonde. Now that they were free, Luffy needed to adjust to the outside world. Talking to someone other than them was a good start. The two boys waited patiently for the boy to say something. They could see that he was trying. Come on, Luffy. You can do it, Ace whispered encouragements to his brother. Luffy had never talked to anyone besides the two of them. Even with them, he didn't say very much. Ace and Sabo had taught him to not talk to anyone as precaution. Who knew when Luffy might say something that would get them in trouble? Everyone they'd worked for simply assumed the boy couldn't talk. Ace and Sabo held Luffy's hands as the boy opened and closed his mouth in an attempt to say something. Luffy then started to feel dizzy before he blacked out. The two boys caught him as he tilted forward. Luffy, they both said in alarm. I'm surprised that he's able to move around with those injuries. The woman who was taking care of Luffy said as she walked towards them. It's no wonder he passed out. Just walking should be painful. Don't worry, nothing's broken, just some lacerations and bruises everywhere. I really mean it. Bruises everywhere, she scowled. What happened to your hand, Yoi? Marco pointed to the hand she was holding close to her chest. He bit me before he took off, she answered dryly. The kid has a set of very sharp teeth and a strong jaw. She had the kids follow her back to the infirmary so she could take another look at Luffy to make sure he hadn't aggravated anything she had already treated. Marco, Whitebeard sounded like he had the weight of the world on his shoulder. Call Garp. See if he can do something about putting them in a foster care where they can stay together. I don't think they would take well to being separated. As much as I want to keep them, a pirate's life is no place for children that young, much less with us. Marco smiled as he nodded and walked away. He knew the children interested the captain, but he was right. A pirate's life was too harsh for children, especially one that lives out in New World. After finishing the call to the Vice Admiral and everything else that had been left undone while he was gone, Marco slipped into the infirmary. The sight brought a smile to his face. The 3 children were asleep in the same fashion as he had seen in the cell, with the 2 older boys hugging the youngest between them. He took a seat next to their bed and watched them, as a sense of tranquility washed over him. Luffy slowly blinked his eyes open and took in his surroundings. At least this time, he knew where he was, kind of. He felt comfort from his brothers sleeping on either side of him. He turned his head to the side and lifted his head to look over Sabo's and saw a blonde stranger giving him a small wave. Hey, the blonde man greeted casually. Did he always look like he was tired? Or maybe he was tired. He needed a nap. Oh, what if he's not allowed naps here? What did Sabo tell him this guy's name was? Marco watched as the boy sat up and looked at him with a wide-eyed blank expression. The funny thing about the look was that it felt like the boy was looking straight inside him. Maybe the kid was looking into his soul or something. He wanted to shake his head at that ridiculous thought. Luffy had such large clear eyes that Marco found himself unable to look away. Co. The soft sound of his own name startled him. Marco stared at the kid with wide eyes of his own. His eyes shifted over to the older brunette when he heard a chuckle from the other side of the bed. Congratulations. You're the first person he's ever talked to. Besides us, Ace drawled with a grin as he lifted his head from the bed to better see the man. Good job, Luffy. Sabo yawned as he reached up to pat the boy's head. The praise caused the boy to smile, and what a smile it was. His smile was so bright that Marco could have sworn the sun was in the room. Marco placed his elbow on his knee and his head in his hand, feeling quite pleased with himself. I'm honored, Yoi. Well, now that you boys are awake, I need to do a checkup on little Luffy, a female voice said from the door. Kobato, Marco greeted. Marco, she returned before turning back to the boy in question. I'm worried about all those old needle marks. Are you on some kind of medication for something? Luffy only tilted his head, not understanding what she wanted to know. No, Sabo looked sadly at Luffy's arm. They sometimes give him, stuff. All different kinds to see what kind of reaction he would have. Their form of entertainment. We don't know what they were. And you too, Kobato said angrily after a moment's pause to take in what was just said. Just Luffy. And it was only for a few weeks. It started when we were sent to the last guy, Ace said as he and Sabo got up and moved to sit a little bit away from Luffy to give the doctor more room to work. Luffy got up to follow his brothers but was stopped by a hand on his shoulder, causing him to stiffen in fear. It's okay, Luffy, Ace said. We're safe here. This lady is a doctor. Doctors are people who make you feel better, Sabo explained. Luffy relaxed and turned around to sit at the edge of the bed, facing the doctor. If Ace and Sabo said it's okay, then it's okay. But he didn't like the angry look she has. Tor. Luffy lifted his bandaged arms and looked back at his brothers. Better? That's right. If you get hurt or don't feel good, you go see a doctor. They make you feel better, Sabo said. Kobato moved a chair to sit in front of her patient after moving all her tools to a nearby table. She smiled at the boy, all trace of anger gone. Luffy's eyes followed her hands as she moved about to pick up something. He pointed at her hand which he had bitten earlier. Sorry, Sabo and Ace quickly grabbed their brother, dragging him into a tight hug, happy that he did something without them telling him to, causing the boy squawk and giggle. Luffy, we're so proud of you. The doctor huffed as she watched them with a strained smile before she pulled the 2 boys off her patient. That's cute and all, but I need to do my work, she told the boys, before turning to Luffy and giving him a smile. Your apology is accepted. Just refrain from doing so again. Luffy tilted his head in confusion before looking to his brothers for clarification. She says, it's okay, but don't do it again, Sabo explained. Luffy looked back to Kobato and nodded. Lucky you, Marco said to the doctor. You're the second person, besides these 2, he's ever talked to Yoi. Kobato gave him a smile and patted his head. I guess I should feel special then. As the doctor worked on him, Luffy turned to Marco, looking as if he remembered something. Thank you. Oh, right, Yoi. Marco finally remembered what Sabo had told Luffy to do before he passed out. You're welcome, Yoi. Kobato sighed after finishing her checkup. We're going to have to keep an eye on him for signs of withdrawal from whatever was administered. I don't have all the right equipment to do any tests to find out what they were. Let me know right away if he starts to act up. Everything looks good, besides a slight malnutrition. Thatch can handle that part. The lacerations will take some time to heal up, along with the bruises. There are no broken bones to worry about. How did he get this scar? She pointed to the visible scar under Luffy's left eye, which didn't look very old. Tripped and landed on a knife, Ace answered with a cringe. She gave Luffy a look of disbelief. You're lucky it didn't get your eye instead. Be careful next time. She then looked to Sabo and gestured for him to come closer. I need to check over you two as well. After she finished with the older two, she deemed them healthy enough. You boys are malnourished also. I'll have Thatch bring you boys something good to eat. You're free to roam about, but stay out of trouble and eat everything Thatch gives you. As for Luffy, he has to stay here until I say he can leave. It probably hurts just to move around. I'm surprised he didn't scream in pain from that hug. The next few days, commanders came in and out to talk to the boys. They had heard about how the youngest was learning to communicate with new people and offered to help. Ace and Sabo had decided to wait on exploring the ship until Luffy was allowed to leave the infirmary. At first, the young boy would hide behind his brothers. Eventually, he got used to random people coming in to talk. Izo was one of the first after Marco and Kobato. The kimono-wearing man introduced himself as the head doctor of the ship and the commander of the 16th Division. He had brought something for Luffy to wear, seeing as he was only clothed in the bandages Kobato had wrapped him in. It's just an old t-shirt from one of my men, but it'll have to do for now. The bright, cheery smile brought warmth to his chest, and he smiled back fondly. You can use this scarf as a belt, so you don't trip over it. We don't have any belts small enough to fit you. Thank you, Luffy said slowly and looked to his brothers to see if he said the right thing. Don't mention it. If you boys need anything, just ask for me or Kobato. Kobato is the only pediatrician on board, so she's the one you should go to for treatment. If you can't find either one of us, just come in here or grab anyone from the 16th Division. My division specializes in the medical field, mostly doctors and nurses. Actually, Sabo said shyly, rubbing the back of his head, we'd really appreciate a bath. The commander looked at the boys thoughtfully before coming to his decision. You two can. Luffy will have to wait until we take his bandages off. Now that Izo really looked at them, they were filthy. Kobato did well in towel bathing the young one before bandaging him. I'll bring something for you boys to wear also, so just toss what you have on. It took some convincing to get Luffy to stay in bed while the two older boys went to clean themselves with a nurse to guide them to the bath. While the boys were gone, Luffy withdrew himself under his blanket until they came back. Izo had no idea what to do with the boy during that time. He even tried to engage the brat in a game of peekaboo, only to feel embarrassed to be doing something like that at his age. At least Kobato came by and saved him from feeling awkward. Thatch would always come in with something for them to eat. He had left them soup and rice porridge their first day there while they were asleep, so he didn't get a chance to talk to them. The first time he brought food when they were awake, he found it amusing and watched fondly as the two older boys fed Luffy. They picked up each item and set in front of the small boy, telling him what it was before he ate it. After that, the 4th Division commander took over the food identifying lessons. That's a banana, a fruit, Thatch said as he handed the boy the yellow fruit. Banana fruit. Banana fruit is the food category. The boy looked confused. Confusing. So banana or fruit? Thatch sighed, giving up on teaching the boy food categories. He'd learn eventually as he grew older. It's a banana. Okay, banana. Luffy opened his mouth to take a bite. Wait, you have to peel it first. Thatch glared at the laughing duo on each side of his student. Do what? Peel it. Like this. Now you can eat it. Just this part. Don't eat the peel. Mushy, the boy said with his mouth full. You don't like it? No, like it. He liked everything Thatch had brought them. Though the first time the head cook brought bread, it wasn't well received at first. Luffy picked up the small loaf with a pout. Bread. Thatch wasn't really surprised that was the first thing the boy was able to identify on his own. But he was surprised that the boy didn't seem to like it. You don't like bread? Bread, the boy said with distaste and stuck his lower lip out further, holding the offending food towards Thatch. Don't be picky, Luffy, Ace told him. You have to eat everything. Always eat everything you're given. You never know when your next meal will be. It didn't go unnoticed by the older man that the other two hadn't touched their bread yet either. While that's true in most cases, with me here, you'll never go hungry. Besides, it's not just any bread. It's rosemary bread. Try it. You might like it. He watched as the boy pouted even harder and took a small bite from the loaf, then began to chomp on it with gusto. He laughed. Good, right. Yummy. Seeing how much their younger brother enjoyed the bread, Ace and Sabo picked up their loaves and gave them a wary look before taking a bite, then downed it in the same manner. Luffy had liked Vista's mustache. Seeing the muscular man finger his mustache, Luffy attempted pull it off once the commander got within reach, wanting to try it on himself. Sorry, brat, but this is something you get once you're a real man, Vista teased as he rubbed his mustache from the painful pulling, causing the boy to tilt his head, not understanding what the swordsman was saying. Blenheim only stopped by and stuck his head in for a few minutes and waved, not wanting to startle the boys with his intimidating size. He had his fair share of scaring people just by being in a room. He wasn't the only one on board with that same problem. He'd just try again once he was sure he wouldn't scare the boys too much. Kingdu, Atmos, Curiel, and Fossa did the same. Only with Fossa, just sticking his head in the room caused the boys to just stare at the scars on his face. Ace and Sabo had automatically pushed Luffy behind them in response to just seeing his face, to which the 15th Division commander just sheepishly rubbed his head and apologized for his scary face and to assure them that he wasn't going to attack them. Zazu thought Luffy had an interesting first reaction to him. He had intended to do as his fellow larger brothers did and just take a peek in to introduce himself so as to not scare the kids. But the smallest brat's wide eyes on him stopped him in his tracks before he could even introduce himself. The next thing he knew, the two older brats were scrambling to grab their younger brother as the kid scurried and somehow climbed his way onto his head to pull at his hair. "Luffy, get down from there," the blonde yelled at the boy. "What are you doing? That's dangerous," the brunette called out as he pawed at Zazu's legs to get to his brother. "Ball," Luffy simply stated in a happy tone, oblivious to his brother's distress. "Ball." There went another tug at his hair. Zazu reached up to pull the boy off his head as the kid cried and pouted about the ball. "That's my hair, brat, not a ball." "Ball," the kid repeated with determination, reaching his hands out to his hair, pouting. "Ball," he wailed and squirmed in Zazu's hands when he realized he wasn't getting the round thing on the man's head. Zazu was saved from another ear-breaking scream when Speed Juru, who had happened to be nearby to hear the beginning of the tantrum, stopped by with an actual ball and handed it to the boy. "Ball." The boy cheered as he took the ball from the 14th Division commander and walked back to his bed in contentment. "Sorry about that." Both Ace and Sabo bowed. "He's been wanting one since he first saw some kids play with it a few years back." Sabo rubbed the back of his head. "I'm surprised he still remembers it. Even more surprised that he didn't listen to us," Ace mumbled as he turned to watch Luffy bounce the ball unsuccessfully on the bed. Both of the commanders laughed at the look of disappointment. Juru walked in and took the ball from the end of the bed, where it had rolled to, and explained that the ball wasn't going to bounce on the bed. He then showed the boy by bouncing it up and down on the wooden floor, causing Luffy to squeal and cheer. On their third day, Flamenco had found the three boys in the hall, with Sabo carrying Luffy. The commander gave them a suspicious look when Ace herded them behind him once the man was in sight. "What are you three doing?" "I thought Izo said the little one isn't to leave the infirmary yet." "Nothing," Ace replied too quickly and piqued the commander's suspicions. "You three aren't trying to run away, are you? I swear no one here is going to kill you or anything. If we wanted to, we would have done it already, instead of spending so much time treating you boys." No, not at all," Sabo quickly replied with a shake of his head and a tentative smile from behind Ace. "We believe you. It's just that, Luffy needs to pee." "Is that so?" The gray-toned man raised an eyebrow at the way the statement was said. His large size made it easy for the man to peer over Ace. Them being kids also helped to get a better look at the two behind him. "Hey, why's the kid crying?" he asked when he noticed Luffy sniffling with his face buried in the blonde's shoulder. "Nothing. He's fine," Ace insisted as he attempted to walk away, keeping himself in front of his brothers. Sabo shuffled behind to keep him and Luffy partially hidden. Flamenco let them pass without question before a smell caught his attention. He smirked at them, causing the two older boys to freeze. The kid wet himself, didn't he? He laughed at the cautious look they threw at him. "Why didn't you say so? I'll see if someone has any extra clothes for you boys and have someone take care of your bed. Go clean yourselves up." The two older boys gave the commanders back a look of surprise as the man walked away, shaking his head and laughing to himself. They thought for sure Luffy would have gotten in trouble for wetting himself. Sabo's parents would always yell at him when he did it, and Daden was no better. She would smack Ace around and make him clean his own bedding. Namor was a little hesitant in meeting the boys. Being a fishman had given him plenty of bad experiences with meeting new people, especially the ignorant ones. That didn't stop Haruta from dragging him through the infirmary door with him. He was relieved and a little confused when none of them even gave him a second look. He decided to not question it and just sat there as Haruta did most of the talking. At one point during his short stay in the room, the little one had gotten off the bed and walked in front of him. The blue commander was then presented with a green rubbery ball that he remembered seeing in Juru's room before. Why his brother even had one was beyond him. Not that it mattered what his brothers kept in their rooms. "You want me to play with you?" Namor asked with a raised eyebrow. He shrugged at the enthusiastic nod he received and lightly tossed the ball at the boy, who then caught it and tossed it back to him. By the time Luffy was able to leave the infirmary, he'd already met all 16 commanders at least once or twice. The first thing Ace and Sabo did when Luffy was cleared to leave the infirmary was to take the small boy to the deck for some fresh air. There were a lot of people they hadn't met yet, just loitering around. They waved and greeted the trio as they passed. A few came to introduce themselves and chat a bit, but not for too long. Luffy mostly hid behind his brothers and didn't talk to anyone. That didn't seem to bother anyone, and the two older brothers were fine with that. It was still progress in Ace and Sabo's book. They walked over to an empty space and looked between the rails at the sea and all. Pirates? Luffy asked his brothers. Yeah, good pirates, Sabo said with a smile. Good pirates. Pirates are just like everyone else, Ace said. Like how there are good people and bad people. Bad pirates would have killed us already or used us like that bastard. He growled the last part. Free, Luffy said in awe. He'd heard so many stories about pirates from his brothers. They told him about their dream of wanting to be pirates so they could be free. He wanted to be a pirate too, so he could show his brothers freedom. Marco woke the three boys up in the infirmary, where they had slept for the past 3 weeks since there was nowhere else for them. Wake up. There's someone here to see you, boy. That woke Ace and Sabo up quickly. Who would want to see them? How did they know they were here? At their alarmed look, Marco told them that they had spoken to someone about giving them a place to stay, since it would be too dangerous for 3 children to stay aboard a pirate ship. That calmed them a bit, but not much. As they made their way to the deck, they could see a muscular man in a white uniform talking with Whitebeard. The familiar Marine uniform had them hesitating. Marines were their enemies. Marines would want Ace dead if they ever found out about his heritage. Why was there a Marine on a pirate ship, talking and laughing with its captain as if they were buddies? But when the Marine turned his face just a fraction, both Ace and Sabo faltered in their steps before running full speed towards the man with their arms wide open. Shitty Gramps, they yelled. Garp's eyes widened, not believing his eyes as 2 very familiar boys ran towards him. As if in a trance, he lifted his arm to punch each boy on the head before they even touched him, causing them to cry out in pain. Never thought I'd miss that. Ace laughed as he grabbed the painful lump on his head. Never thought I'd miss seeing Shitty Gramps. Sabo grinned with his brother, also nursing a painful lump. Luffy, seeing his brothers getting hit, wanted to run up to the man and beat him up, but Marco stopped him. Luffy looked at him in confusion, then looked back to his brothers as they laughed. Why were they laughing after getting punched? Well, at least they were okay with it. He just held onto Marco's pants with one hand and his ball with the other as he followed the man's leisurely pace to the group. Ace, Sabo, is it really you boys? Garp asked in shock. Yup. Ace grinned, with his fists on his hips. In the flesh, Sabo also grinned. Garp pulled them into a hug and sobbed like a child. I thought I'd never see you two again. You just up and disappeared. And Datten, that old hag, said you guys got kidnapped right in front of her. He wiped away his tears and gave them a humorous grin. Would you believe she tore down the whole forest looking for you guys? I bet she didn't think you'd be out here. He laughed loudly. Yeah, we were hunting rabbits for dinner, while the old hag just sat there and did nothing. Ace huffed as wiped his tears and crossed his arms, before he gave a fond smile. She really did that? Huh, seems you 3 know each other. Whitebeard broke up their tearful reunion. My grandsons. The Marine gave the large man a huge smile, before he frowned. Who's that? He motioned his head towards Marco's leg, where Luffy stood, feeling lost and confused. That's Luffy, Sabo answered. He was kidnapped too. Not too sure why they would want to kidnap a baby though. Garp's eyes widened at the name. Luffy, baby. Yeah, what's wrong, Gramps? Ace asked at the man's renewed tears. Instead of answering, the man let go of the 2 and crawled the couple of feet over to the confused boy and said softly as more tears came down, Monkey D. Luffy, we've never met, but I'm your grandpa. This stunned the group. No one ever told them Luffy's full name. Not even Ace or Sabo knew what it was. You're so big. I'm so sorry I've missed so much. He brought the kid into a tight hug, his shoulders shaking. Whitebeard, I can't even tell you how much this means to me. Bo. Luffy reached his hands out to his escaped toy, only for it to be handed back by Marco. He had no idea what was going on. His brothers cried, then they laughed. That means they're not hurt, right? Then this old guy hugs him a little too tight and cried even harder than his brothers did. Is this old man okay? Is he hurt? Whitebeard only gave the graying man a fond smile. Why don't we take this to my room and we can talk? I'm sure we all have questions. Ace and Sabo once again told their story of what happened with them and how Luffy came along. Garp gave the 2 boys a proud smile, letting them know how proud he was that they were able to take care of a toddler and themselves so well. Then he spoke seriously with Whitebeard. Now that it's come to this, I can't take these boys. I think it's best to leave them here with you. Your name alone will keep them safe. Garp continued at the captain's confused look. My son, Dragon. Whitebeard's eyes widened at those few words in understanding. It wasn't common knowledge that Dragon was Hero Garp's son, and it completely slipped his mind. You want us to keep him safe from the government? Garp nodded. I see. Gramps, what do you mean? Ace asked. Luffy's dad is currently the most dangerous and most wanted man in the world. If the government finds out about Luffy, he knew the 2 boys would understand. Ace was in the same situation after all. Ace grabbed Luffy in a tight hug, with the smaller boys back to his chest. Luffy has nothing to do with his shitty dad. Luffy is Luffy. What does his blood have to do with anything? Garp nodded in agreement. Luffy was on a ship headed to Dawn Island, where he could have lived in peace when he was taken a little over a year before you boys. Dragon didn't want his burden to drag his child down. Luffy, he looked to the boy. My stupid son, your dad left me a message for you. Live your life the way you want. You are your own person. Live freely. Ace and Sabo looked surprised at the message. His dad wanted his son to live his own life and not be tied down by his blood. Ace wondered if that's what his dad, Gul D. Roger, would have wanted for him too, and if that was the reason why Garp had taken him in. I guess we don't have much choice, then. We'll stay here. Ace crossed his arms. Garp gave the boys a warm smile. You boys have changed. Ace looked away in embarrassment. It's what babies do to you. He repeated what he overheard Dogra say to Daden one night. This caused the men in the room to laugh. Yeah, well, we may have another problem though, Sabo said. Luffy's, well, how do I explain this? Different. We wanted to keep it a secret, just in case. But if Gramps trusts you guys. What do you mean, Yoy? Marco asked. Luffy, how many people are on the ship next to this one? Sabo asked the boy, rather than answering the question. Luffy tilted his head while still being held by Ace. 13. Garp narrowed his eyes at the boy. How do you know that? He did bring 13 of his most trusted men with him. Somehow. Well, that's interesting, Yoy. Marco whistled. I've heard of children being born with haki, but I've never met one, Yoy. Sabo started uncertainly. Not sure what that is, but there's another problem. The men looked at him to continue, but Ace picked up the rest of the explanation. He's a genius when it comes to fighting. He learns just by watching. He's not strong, but he's good, especially with weapons. Great, Marco muttered sarcastically before sighing. That's not good, Yoy. There would be all sorts of wrong people after him if anyone learns about that. I take it, that's what you three had been doing, fighting Yoy. Yeah, Sabo nodded. Since he learned so fast, he's actually our main fighting force. Ace and I are his backup. That's kind of why you were lucky Lou wasn't able to fight that time. Ace winced. You still would have won. There are too many of you guys. But at least the idiot leader would have had a fighting chance. If Lou were there would have been a lot more casualties. We just want you to know what comes with keeping us here, Sabo said. Just in case, you know. Speaking of which, Ace, Sabo, Garp gave the boys a steeled look. I believe you should tell them everything they're up against with you two also staying here. As you've said, I trust these people. Everything said in here today will not be slipped to anyone else. Do you understand? Ace glared at the man, knowing what he was saying. In the end, they both nodded and stood tall, ready for whatever may come their way. Newgate, if you need any more convincing to keep them here, it's not just Luffy that needs the protection. Garp looked to the boys for them to tell their own tales. Sabo looked up to Whitebeard and started first. My name's Sabo. I'm a noble, but I ran away from my family because I don't agree with their despicable ways. They don't care about anything but their status. All humans that aren't born a noble are considered trash. They'll do anything to get me back so I don't tarnish their name. Garp nodded, letting the other two men know what the boy said was true. They've gone as far as hiring a local pirate to get him back. Daden didn't tell me the whole story about that. Sabo rubbed the back of his hair as he smiled. Daden and the rest of the gang rescued me and Ace. And you? Whitebeard looked at Ace with interest. Ace flinched but took a step forward and looked at Whitebeard. He squared his shoulders and readied his resolve. I'm Porcas Diaz. Real name is Gul Diaz, son of Gul D. Roger. Whitebeard's eyes softened. Roger's son. The fondness in which it was said confused the boy. Wasn't Roger your enemy? We were rivals. We were also drinking buddies, but enemies we were not. Whitebeard looked up, lost in memories. The world may think of him as a dangerous man, but those who knew him know better. He was a good man. Ace was thoroughly confused. Everyone he talked to talked about the late Pirate King as some kind of monster that deserved his death. But the man he thought of as Roger's enemy talked about the late Pirate King as if they were good friends. We are all children of the seas. Your lineage does not matter here. Be it a runaway son of nobles or two children whom the government believes should never have been born, Whitebeard declared. Garp, you're always delivering something troublesome. Whitebeard laughed. Fine, they stay. From now on, you boys will be Whitebeard Pirates' cabin boys. You have to pull your own weight around here. He grinned at the boys. Don't understand, Luffy said. He means we can stay, but we have to do some work to help out, Sabo explained. Luffy titled his head. Work? We just have to help clean and run errands, Ace explained. Luffy brightened at that. Oh, okay. What Grandpa and Dad? That one statement brought a stunned silence to the room. As one, the adults turned their heads to look at the two older children. What? They boys yelled defensively. After what felt like an eternity, they somehow managed to teach the young boy what a grandpa and a dad were. It wasn't easy as they had to explain other things just to explain what they were explaining. The result ended up being Grandpa and Dad people, Ace and Sabo parent. Sure, kid, Marco sighed with his face buried in his hands. Who knew teaching a brat the basic structure of a family would be so frustrating? The two older boys smiled, relieved that some of their problems were solved. And their Gramps, the only person they truly trusted, was within reach to help them. By the way, Ace turned to Garp. Why are you here? I mean, on a pirate ship. You're a Marine, right? You mean you've never told them? Whitebeard raised an eyebrow at that. Garp laughed. I work with pirates, he said as if it wasn't important. Of course, only the ones I like. I help them, they help me. Don't tell anyone though. He laughed again at their stunned reaction. I'm taking my grandsons for a few weeks for an overdue bonding time, he decided. Garp had taken the boys to an island to do some shopping. He'd changed out of his marine uniform and into his vacation clothes, consisting of a brightly colored tropical shirt, long shorts, and sandals. Sabo was grateful they found clothes similar to the ones he'd worn before. They were comfortable to him. Not to mention he had missed his top hat, which was also replaced. The crazy old man may be crazy, but he did remember what the boys liked wearing, even after all that time away from them. It was a great bonding time to make up for the years they missed. Not that Garp was with them that often before, something the old man regretted. Their grandpa had taken them to store after store, buying them just about anything they asked for, though it was mostly necessities. The group was about to walk past a toy store, but Luffy had stopped to look at the window full of things that would interest kids their age. Why don't we go in? Without waiting for an answer, Garp herded them into the store, letting them stroll around looking at whatever caught their fancy. Luffy's eyes were so wide at all the new things he was seeing that he didn't notice his two brothers leaving him behind to look at something else. Garp had stayed with the youngest to watch over him with a sad smile on his face. The grief he felt when he learned that his own grandchild, whom he had never gotten to meet, had been kidnapped had been overwhelming. When he learned the two other grandchildren he'd adopted were also taken a year later, he didn't let anything stop him from looking for them, leaving no stones unturned. 2 years later, he finally stopped, grieving his loss. Now that he'd gotten all three back, he was going to leave them again. At least this time he knew where they were, and that they would be safe there. But the look of wonder and excitement over every little thing on Luffy's face made his heart ache, wanting to be there for them every step of their growth. With the government actively hunting down his idiotic son, there was no way they would be able to live in peace like a normal family. Not that living with pirates would make things normal. He followed Luffy around the small store as the kid looked at everything in fascination, until they stopped at a wall of stuffed animals. He noticed the kid staring at a stuffed dog that was at his eye level. Luffy tentatively moved his hands to touch it and a large smile grew on his face. He picked it up and rubbed it against his face, enjoying the feel of the soft, plush material. You want that, brat? Luffy nodded and giggled with the dog clutched tightly to his face. All right, let's go find your brothers and pay for that. He gave the kid a light pat on the back. Later, Luffy stopped in front of another store, this time bringing confusion to the other three's faces. Luffy, there's nothing you'd want in there, Ace said slowly as he carefully looked through the store window to see what caught his brother's eyes. Want? The three of them looked at what the boy pointed to. Luffy, that's a dress, Sabo said uncertainly. I know you've worn them before, but dresses are for girls. You're a boy. Want? Luffy said insistently. Pretty. What? Garp all but yelled at his grandson's taste in clothing. You think that thing is pretty. The one next to it is much prettier. This time Ace and Sabo looked at the frilly pink dress their grandpa pointed to in horror. No, pretty. Luffy continued to point at the other, less frilly, pale green dress. The two boys looked on in embarrassed amusement as the oldest and the youngest of their group argued about which dress looked pretty. Giving up on the ridiculous argument, they pickpocketed their grandpa and went in the store to buy the dress Luffy wanted and a couple others. Why not? Luffy'd never been this assertive about wanting anything before, so what's the harm in indulging him? They came back to see that the arguing duo had garnered an audience. Ace glared at the ones giving his brother a disgusted look. What was so wrong with his brother wanting to wear a dress? Sure, he, himself, wouldn't be caught dead in one, but that's his little brother. Sabo only heaved a sigh and announced that they'd already bought the dress for Luffy, so Gramps should just give it up and let Luffy wear what he wanted. Now, they were on an uninhabited island full of huge foliage, waiting for Whitebeard to pick them up. Garp had left them on their own after a quick sparring match with them. He'd taken time off for too long and had to get back to work. The spar left the man with knowledge that the boys would be able to take care of themselves. Though, Ace and Sabo were pretty sure the old man just wanted to beat them up for old time's sake. They were just glad that Luffy was left out of it. Just before he left, Garp sat down with Ace on the beach, while Sabo and Luffy were off playing in the shallow parts of the water. Ace, the man started solemnly, your father. He heaved a sigh and paused, thinking of how to tell his grandson. Goldie Roger wasn't captured by me. He was already dying when he turned himself in. While he was in prison, he told me about your mother and asked me to protect the unborn you. Remember when you asked me if it was good that you were alive? Ace could only nod numbly as he listened to his grandfather. I still stand by my answer. You'll only know by living. When I first held you, Ace, I knew right then that I'd protect you as if you were my own grandson. It didn't matter that you weren't my blood. To me, you are my grandson, just as Luffy and Sabo are. I know I wasn't there for you much, but believe me when I say I was only doing what I thought was best. I raised you and Sabo both to be strong Marines, just so you would be where I could watch over you. But with how things turned out, I think living out your dream to be a pirate is the next best plan. At least with Whitebeard, I know you'll be safe. Ace threw himself at the old man and gave him a hug, trying to hide the fact that he was tearing up. He was grateful for this man he called Gramps. Thank you. Garp placed a hand softly on the boy's back. Just be careful out there and don't get caught. There's only so much I can do for you boys now. I can't believe Garp left those kids on this island of all places. Thatch complained as they neared the island. I mean, yes, uninhabited, but really, there are tons of dangerous animals here that wouldn't think twice about eating those kids. Thatch, Marco, and Vista quickly rowed their boat to the beach once they realized the boys weren't waiting where they were told they should be. Damn it, where did they go, Yoy? Marco said as he turned his head this way and that to look for them. Didn't that damn Marine tell them this is the only part of the island the animals don't go near, Yoy? There, Vista pointed. I see smoke. Something must have happened. The three of them tore through the large foliage towards the direction of the smoke. They stumbled to a stop at a clearing, shocked at what they found. The three boys, now in new, clean clothes, were sitting around a campfire eating what looked like a tiger 2 times the normal size. What took you guys so long? Sabo said in between bites. Yeah, we got bored, Ace said around a mouthful of meat. Luffy didn't even acknowledge them as he tore into the meat that he had in each hand. He was the only dirtied one there. The men stared in amazement at the large piles of bones next to each child and wondered how much these boys could actually eat. With nothing better to do, they sat down with the boys and waited for them to finish eating. They ate some as well just to pass the time. Please tell me you don't always eat this much, Thatch whined as the boys finished eating. Well, me and Sabo did. Didn't know Luffy could eat that much too. Ace wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Feels like we haven't eaten that much in a long time. Sabo fell to his back, satisfied that his stomach was now filled. Finally full. So you guys took this thing down yourselves? Vista asked. Yeah, Luffy finally spoke, with much enthusiasm. I run, and it chased me. Then Ace and Sabo hit it. You used your brother as bait, Yoy. Marco looked at the two in disbelief. How else were we supposed to catch a tiger? Sabo looked at them questioningly. That's how Daten used to do it. Good lord, Marco swiped his hand down his face. Anyway, it's time to go. Come on, Yoy. Awa, want more gator? Yummy, Luffy pouted. During their short time away from the ship, he'd learned to express himself and, to Ace and Sabo's annoyance, become much more demanding. No more gator. Ace and Sabo smacked the boy on the head. You nearly got eaten, you little shit, Ace yelled at his brother. What? The three men turned their wide eyes to them. Luffy thought they were moving stepping stones and thought it'd be fun to stomp all over them. Sabo grumbled with crossed arms. One ate him. Then we killed it and pulled him out. He's never allowed near another gator. The two older boys grabbed the bags of things that Garp had bought for them, and they headed back. Oh, yeah, Ace said as they walked up the plank to Moby Dick. Not sure if this is important, but Gramps says Luffy is 7. We just assumed he was 5, since that's how long he's been with us, and he was tiny. 7? Huh. Thatch looked the boy in question up and down. That's not good. He's way too small for his age. 4 or 5 I would believe. I'll be sure to let Kobato know. That's what we thought too. We were bigger than that when we were his age. Might be because he didn't eat enough. Sabo asked. All they fed us was bread and water 2 times a day. We did go around stealing food when we had the chance, though, Ace said. And that's how you guys survived, Yoy, Marco concluded. That explained why they weren't as malnourished as they could have been. Bread and water was not enough for growing children. Well, Kobato said you guys are healthy enough. I guess we shouldn't worry too much about his size, Yoy. We're going to need to restock again soon. If these guys eat like that all the time, Thatch moaned. You don't have to. We can eat less. We're fine with the portions you've been giving us, Sabo said. We don't want to be a burden after all the trouble we've caused you. I mean, we did kidnap Marco. And you guys are taking care of us. That's already enough. It's my job to make sure everyone on this ship eats their fill. Thatch winked at them. Besides, I already told you that no one goes hungry when I'm in charge. So if you're still hungry, just say so. I actually want to know how you kids to manage to kidnap Marco. Vista mused with his hand on his chin and thought. Children are less suspicious, Yoy, was all Marco grumbled as he led the boys to his room, while Thatch and Vista took the boys' bags to the room they prepared for them. Once there, he handed each of the boys a sheet of paper. These are your list of chores on this ship. You're free to do them whenever you want, Yoy, but they need to all be done at least once a week. You'll also be running various errands as we need, Yoy. You can do what you want during your free time. Luffy turned his sheet sideways and upside down and tilted his head. Before he asked Marco, what this? Sorry, Sabo said and took the paper from the boy to look over with his own. He can't read, didn't have anything to teach him with. We'll do these chores together, that way they'll be done faster. Luffy wouldn't know how to do any of these things. I see, Yoy. In that case, I think I can spare some time to help him learn. Come, I'll give you a tour of the ship and show you where everything is. You can start tomorrow since the day's almost over, Yoi. He showed them to the room they had prepared for them while they were gone. It was right across from the 1st Division commander's room. If you need anything, just ask any of the commanders or pops, though I'm in charge of you three, Yoi. As the months passed, the boys were falling into the routine of cleaning, lessons, playing, lazing about, and chasing a naked Luffy after every bath. It didn't take them as long as it first did to do their chores. They even had to teach Luffy many everyday things as the days went along. The ship was huge, which was why Marco had originally split up their chores, with each boy cleaning separate sections of the ship. Now he'd learned that it was much quicker when they worked together. Usually one or the other would get distracted by something and someone would have to get him back on track. Or in Luffy's case, clean up the mess that he made. Whitebeard was pleased by how fast they were learning to adjust to their new family, since it didn't take them nearly as long to finish their chores. They had more free time, and there was only so much they could do on a ship. Now they were bored, so they went to Whitebeard and asked him for a favor, which the captain laughed and agreed to, as long as they told Marco and Blamingco about it. The galley was filled with hungry pirates, noisy as they were. One table in particular went silent as they heard kids laughing underneath them. The group looked under the table and found nothing. I could have sworn I heard the kids laughing, Haruta mused. So did I, Izo agreed. They heard it again. This time the two surrounding tables went silent and inspected under their tables as well. Marco grinned. He knew what the boys were up to, but he wasn't going to say anything. The boys wanted to keep this a secret. Marco, you know what's going on, don't you? Thatch accused from beside his brother. I don't know what you're talking about, Yoi, Marco said as he picked up his empty plate and walked away. This went on. The men would hear the kids but not see them. More often than the laughs, they could hear the sound of pounding and other tools at work. It was starting to creep some of them out. It's like a haunted house, someone said. When the kids were out and about doing their chores, some would come up and ask the boys what they'd been up to. Their answers were always less than helpful. Play hide and seek would be Luffy's answer. The other two would just say it's a secret. They were even more confused when Luffy would show up out of nowhere. But that wasn't what surprised them the most. It was the fact that he would sometimes show up wearing a dress of all things. Not that it didn't look good on him, but Luffy was a boy, right? Why is Luffy in a dress? Vista asked the first morning over breakfast. Why not? Ace shrugged. He said it was pretty, so Gramps bought it for him, Sabo explained. He has more than one. We're not going to stop him from wearing what he wants. Getting him to remember to wear clothes is bad enough. The commanders at the table nodded and said no more. Besides, Izo liked to wear female kimonos, so what's the difference? Each time they reached an island under Whitebeard's protection, the boys would run off on their own after being told when the ship would leave. And each time, Marco would hand them a small pouch of money to spend. They would always tell him that they'd pay him back. But Marco didn't mind. He was a pirate. He had more where that came from, and when he ran out, well, let's just say he knew just how to get more. The boys would always come back covered in dirt, looking like they had the time of their lives and bringing back things they bought on the islands. On the islands that weren't under their protection, Marco would go with them. One day, the ship was attacked by an enemy pirate, the stupid kind that thought they could take Whitebeard's head and gain instant fame. They were still in Grand Line, so the enemies were no match for them. Rarely do the stronger ones leave New World, not wanting to lose their place in their journey. The three boys sat with their backs against the cabin wall, hugging their legs, keeping out of the way, as they watched the battle. They could tell it was horribly one-sided, and the Whitebeard crew was taking their time. Marco told them to stay out of the way, and now they were bored. Then an idea came. Ace looked to Whitebeard, who was seated in his large chair right next to them, also observing the battle. Hey, do you mind if we go steal some treasures? He pointed to the enemy ship. Whitebeard watched the battle a little longer before answering. Sure, just be careful. Yell if you need help. Yeah, all three ran to the smaller ship, Ace and Sabo kicking down a couple of pirates along the way. Marco, Whitebeard called out. Yeah, keep an eye on those brats. Whitebeard gestured to the ship where the boys went. They were bored. He answered Marco's questioning look. Marco walked over to the side of Moby and looked down. He raised an eyebrow at the obviously dead bodies on the deck below. These pirates may be weak by their standards, but the fact that they made it out to Grand Line meant they're a little stronger than your average pirate. He wondered how the boys took those guys down without any weapons on them, or if someone actually took the time to go down to that ship and kill them first. As he stood there and thought, he heard light laughter coming from the ship's small cabin. The three boys ran out to the deck and waved at him, grinning from ear to ear. They each had a bag brimming with treasure, so overfilled that at each movement they made, coins would fall out. You need help there, Yoi? Marco asked, as Luffy had trouble dragging his bag. Luffy looked to his bag and back to Marco and nodded. Marco chuckled before jumping down. He relieved the boy of his burden and followed the trio back to their ship. The three ran to Whitebeard with their loot and he followed, curious as to what they were so excited about. They placed their bags in front of the captain. "Here you go," Ace said. Whitebeard laughed at the gesture. "We have a rule on this ship. What you take off the enemy is yours. So these treasures are now yours." He laughed some more. "But we eat a lot," Ace insisted, not wanting him and his brothers to be an inconvenience to the people who were helping them. "Thatch and his men will rid that ship of their supplies in a bit. Don't you boys worry about a thing." Whitebeard waved them off with a smile. He wasn't about to tell the boys that his sons and daughters usually donated a small share of their loot for supplies. No, these boys were allowed to keep everything. "Oh, okay, then," Sabo said, then turned to Marco. "So how much do we owe you?" The boy grinned. Marco gave a lazy smirk and opened the bag he carried and took out a small handful of gold coins. "This much should be enough, Yoy." "You sure?" Luffy asked. "We bought lots." Marco ruffled the boy's hair. "This is plenty. Let's put this in the treasury, Yoy. You'll have your own special spot for it, so no one will touch it." Once the bags of treasure were put in the treasure room, the boys secretly came back and put one of their bags in the section clearly marked for the kitchen. It was still dark out when the boys were tossed off their bed and onto the wooden floor in a tangle of limbs. They heard the pounding of footsteps outside their door and a few people yelling out muffled orders. "Ugh, what happened?" Ace asked as he rubbed the back of his head with one hand, the other holding Luffy close to his chest. "Sounds like a storm." Sabo grunted from under both of his brothers. "Think you guys can get off me? Please, I can't breathe," Ace yelped, not realizing he was sitting on this brother, and quickly stood up with Luffy in his arms. "Sorry, a storm? Huh. I've heard storms in Grand Line are different than what we usually saw at dawn. I kinda want to see it." "Me too." Sabo then turned to give his brother a grin. "Wanna go check it out?" Sabo quietly opened their door, and they poked their heads out to see some dripping wet crew members grumbling and walking back to their sleeping quarters, while a few dry ones ran past to take over their post in protecting the ship from the storm. There was a loud grumbling sound from all around before the ship lurched, causing Sabo to lose his grip on the door handle, and the three of them soon were rolling out into the corridor. "What are you boys doing out here, Yoy?" Marco asked from where he stood in front of his own bedroom door, with a den mushy in his hand. "We, wanted to see the storm," Sabo said sheepishly. "Never seen a Grand Line storm before?" "Then Yoy." The 1st Division commander chuckled at the two older boys' enthusiastic nods. He gave a quick command to someone at the end of the den mushy before telling the boys to go back to their room. "It's not safe out here. Maybe once you boys are stronger and older you can experience it. For now, just go back to your room and hold on to something. The waves are so erratic that even I have to stay in the cabin. Devil fruit users and the sea don't get along." He gave them a wink. The boys noticed Jazu and Flamenco were also out in the hall giving orders through their den mushy. "Where's Whitebeard?" Ace asked. "Probably in his room like the other fruit users." Before Marco could answer, the ship tilted, sending everyone stumbling to catch their footing and grabbing anything secure to keep them from sliding to the other end of the hallway. Marco cursed himself for forgetting to grab the children as they quickly slid downward towards the opening at the other end. "Stop those kids," he shouted to everyone below him. Seeing the screaming kids frantically trying to grab all the outstretched hands unsuccessfully, Marco let go of his door frame and transformed himself to fly towards the kids, who were now nearing the end of the corridor and heading out to the back deck where no one was posted. All helping hands were manning the front or up securing the sails. Luckily, someone was able to grab Luffy before he made it out. All that was left were the two older boys. He tucked his wings close to his body and dived. He internally cheered when he was able to grab Ace's shirt in his beak, with Ace holding Sabo's hand in both of his. By this time the ship was back to its horizontal position. Moments later, a wave came crashing towards them, causing Marco to turn back to his human self. He landed on deck, back first, and got the wind knocked out of him. "You boys all right?" Marco asked after getting his breath back. Sabo, Ace coughed up some water, then started to look around frantically, while still being clutched by Marco. "Sabo, where's Sabo?" Ace, calm down, Yoy," Marco said as Kingdu and Fossa came to help them back to the cabins. "The waves took him," Fossa said. Becky jumped in after him, and Namor followed. "Did you hear that, Ace, Yoy?" Namor went to get them. "Sabo will be fine. Calm down, Yoy," Marco said as he struggled to keep the boy from escaping his hold to dive in after his brother. Becky, his right-hand man, was a great swimmer, and with Namor also out there, Marco was sure that they would all come back safely. The whole ordeal lasted only a few minutes, and the storm only lasted 5. Soon the sky was clear and sunny again. Everyone poured out of the cabin to check on the commander and the boy once the storm was done. As soon as Luffy saw his brother, he twisted his way out of the arms that were holding him and ran to jump on his brother's back. "Luffy," Ace said, startled out of his chant of Sabo's name. "You okay?" He buried his face in Ace's neck. "Sabo's okay. Sabo's coming back." Seeing that Ace had calmed down with Luffy on his back, Marco placed the boys back on the ground and followed them as Ace walked towards the rail where Luffy was pointing. After a few seconds of not seeing anything, Ace became restless and started bouncing on his feet and resumed his chant. The rest of the crew that weren't manning the ship and getting it back on course were on the back deck waiting for their brothers to come back. They all cheered once they caught sight of Becky and Sabo riding Namor coming their way. Sabo, 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 Sabo. Sabo. Ace reached his arms out over the rails, wanting to be with his brother as soon as possible. Marco had to place a hand on the overly excited boy to keep him from falling overboard. He and the others around him smiled at the sight of how happy the boy was, while completely ignoring the way Luffy was kicking excitedly at his sides. Ace and Sabo were staring at a bookstore window in one of Whitebeard's territories. They were contemplating if they wanted to go in or not when the old man they had just bought cotton candy from a few minutes ago came running towards them. "Hey, you boys!" The man came to a stop in front of them. He had a very annoyed look on his face. Ace looked to Sabo, mentally asking each other if either one of them did something that would warrant running right now. "Where's that other kid you were with earlier?" "Luffy," they asked together as they looked down at the empty space in between them. "Luffy, I thought you were holding his hand," Sabo asked Ace. "I thought you were." His right hand was sticky, so was his left. Ace then grabbed his hair and crouched down in panic when Sabo shook his head. "Shit, we lost Luffy. What do we do? Where did we lose him? What do we tell Gramps?" "That kid came back to my stall not too long ago and ordered 2 extra large-sized cotton candies. I took my eyes off him for a second, and he left without paying." The man's face went from accusing to worry once he realized that little boy could be wandering the island, lost. 2 extra large cotton candies, they both asked in confusion. "That's right. I thought he was bringing them to you boys. Why don't I help you look for him? I wouldn't want him to get lost on the island or anything." 2 extra large cotton candies, they repeated, but this time with comprehension. "It's okay, sir," Sabo told the cotton candy man. "We think we know where our brother is." "How much do we owe you for those 2 cotton candies he took off with?" "Why don't we find your brother first? I'd feel better knowing he's safe." The boys shrugged and led the man down a few alleys, and they soon found themselves deep in the forest at the far edge of the island. "Are you sure he'd be this far away from town?" The man looked around cautiously, hoping they didn't run into any dangerous animals. The boys just walked on, unaware of the older man's anxiety. "Pretty sure," they both answered. "You said he took 2, right?" Sabo asked and continued when the man nodded. "Then, I think he's bringing one to someone. And everyone he knows, besides us, is in this forest. As far as I know, no one lives in this forest. There aren't many, but there are a few dangerous animals here," the older man warned them. "Don't worry," Ace grinned at the man. "Luffy can take care of himself. He's really fast. If anything, he can just outrun it and get help." "There they are," Sabo said as they neared voices. The old man fell on his bottom when they pushed back some large leaves to reveal the Whitebeard pirates, with their captain's back closest to them. "Luffy," both the boys yelled in irritation, unafraid of the pirates before them. And there the man saw him, the boy that ran away without paying for the cotton candy, the same boy he was worried about being lost and alone on the island. That very same boy was sitting on the captain's shoulder with a sugary mess on his face. The boy turned his head to look back and down at his brothers and waved before jumping down. Once he was in front of them, they both smacked him on the head. "Why did you leave without telling us?" "Cotton candy," the boy whined while waving his partially eaten sweet. "Wanted to share." This time he pointed at Whitebeard, who looked oddly ashamed with his half-eaten sweet. "Next time tell us, so we don't get worried," Sabo scolded. Then added as an afterthought, "And you didn't pay for it." "And no, it's okay. You don't have to pay for it." The old man crawled backwards on the ground, which he hadn't managed to get up. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were with Whitebeard." "Huh?" Luffy tilted his head in confusion. "Pay, Luffy, pay," Ace said, not listening to the poor old man. "You have to pay for things." To show him, Ace took out his pouch of coins and turned to the cotton candy seller to ask how much they owed. The man stuttered out that they didn't have to pay. Whitebeard laughed at this and insisted that they pay. "I'm sorry, my youngest is still learning the simplest of things. Seems your cotton candy has caught his attention. Enough of it that he didn't remember to tell his precious brothers where he was going." Ace and Sabo looked at each other in surprise and gave a small cheer to themselves. "Luffy left us on his own." Luffy walked up to the man on the ground, smiling happily and waved his cotton candy in front of him. "Yummy, I want more." "Luffy," Sabo groaned with his hand on his face, "you don't need any more. The first one was enough. With as much as you already had, I'll be surprised if you even sleep tonight." He turned to the older man to apologize. Sorry about him. It's his first time having cotton candy. He then turned to look at Ace with a look of questioning. Actually, would this be considered his first act of piracy? Ace shrugged and grinned. His first act of piracy is to steal cotton candy. Why not? Sounds like a Luffy thing to do. The older man barked out a laugh as he sat up with his legs crossed and slapped his thigh. He loved kids. They were the reason he sold cotton candy for a living. And they were the kids of Whitebeard, who had saved their island from terrorizing pirates many years back. How could he forget that? Whitebeard was different from most pirates. Somehow, in the back of his mind, he knew that Whitebeard wouldn't let just any kids on his ship. These three must have their own story of hardship. How about this? To commemorate the boy's first act of piracy, he can keep his loot, just pay the next time you stop by. The whole crew roared in a cheer and celebrated, as if they needed a reason to party. Every other island stop seemed to be a reason to party. Luffy wasn't sure what was going on, but when Sabo told him to thank the old man, he gave him a nice, sugary, sticky hug. The cotton candy man left the pirate crew, laughing and with cotton candy stuck in his hair. Marco went with him to ensure the man got out of the forest safely. Divided by. Marco, the trio sang from the deck one day. It had already been more than half a year since they'd moved on the ship. The rest of the crew had mostly gotten used to the random noises and laughter that came out of nowhere and the kids' random appearances and disappearances. Over here, he waved them over to where he stood with Whitebeard on the upper deck. They ran over to them with excitement on their faces. "We're done," Sabo said. "Wanna see?" "Sorry, old man, but you're too big to fit." "No worry. As long as the ship doesn't sink, it's fine." Whitebeard laughed and waved them off. The boys dragged Marco to their bedroom. "This is the only one that you can use. The rest, only we can use," Sabo explained as Ace pushed their desk away from the wall. Luffy pressed down on a spot on the floorboard where a large section opened upward, and Luffy jumped down. As the trio jumped down, Marco looked around the hole and decided to use the ladder that was there and closed the door on his way down. "Impressive yoi," he said as he looked around in wonder. He knew their ship was huge, but wow. Without all the cargo laying around, the cargo hold looked enormous. He took notice of the various ladders and was glad they hadn't removed the support beams. Though with Flamenco helping them, he shouldn't worry too much about the structure. The head shipwright would have made sure Moby wouldn't sink. There are even additional supports where they thought it was needed. And how did they manage to get those bookshelves down here? He also noticed the rearrangements of the regular lighting fixtures and a few new ones to brighten the place. "What did you do with all the cargo, yoi?" "It's all on that side of the wall." Ace pointed to the back of the ship. "You guys can still get to it from the back hatch, but you can't come in here from there." "We can though." Marco then looked up as he noticed he could hear everything that was happening above. "You installed listening devices, yoi?" "Kind of," Ace beamed. "Those things are expensive. So we did something better. We made our own," Sabo said, proud of himself. "That way we know if we're called for. We didn't put them under any of your bedrooms, just so you know." Invasion of privacy. "And all," Ace supplied. Marco looked up again and saw the small cone-like things scattered around the ceiling, working like a megaphone. "Nice. Put one under mine. It'd be more convenient, yoi," he commented. "And what's behind that wall, yoi?" The blonde commander tilted his head towards the wall that had a normal door at the front of the ship. "Nothing yet." Sabo scratched the back of his head with a look of confusion. Flamenco said he wanted to do something there. He didn't say what. "More doors, yoi." His head gestured to the various latches on the ceiling. "Yup," said Luffy, who then started pulling Marco towards one of the many ladders and across a beam to a random hatch-like door. "Watch this." The boy opened the door just enough for his eyes to peek through. Marco did the same and saw they were now below the galley. Then Luffy raised a pistol through the peephole and aimed at one of his division member. Marco was now alarmed and was about to stop the boy, but it was too late. He quickly turned his head to look at the person who was shot at, only to see the man had a blue splotch on his face. The target looked around frantically to see what had happened with a hand on his cheek, smearing the paint. Luffy closed the door and laughed. "That's dangerous." Marco smacked the boy on the head, careful to not dislodge the boy from their precarious perch. "What the hell was that, yoi?" Luffy rubbed his head and pouted, unsure what he did wrong. "Sabo made it. It shoots colors." Marco confiscated the weapon from the boy and hopped down to inspect it. "You made this, yoi?" He looked to Sabo. "Yup. Thought it'd be funny," Sabo said proudly, though a little worried that the man would be mad at them. "I even found out how to stop the recoil and make it quiet." "Impressive," he found himself saying again. "Where did you learn to do this, yoi?" Sabo pointed to one of the bookcases that had a few books on it. Ace mentioned something about wanting to prank some people and thought paint would be funny. "I was reading about the workings of pistols at the time, so I thought I'd give it a try. There were a few failures, but I finally made one that works. Ace tells me his ideas, and I make them. That's how we used to do things, well, before the whole kidnapping thing. I'm not too good at putting things together." Ace scratched the side of his head, looking away from the man, and Luffy just isn't good at thinking. All he did was help a bit and run around like the idiot he is. Marco gave them a proud look. "You three have amazing teamwork, yoi." But still, he looked around again. Why a secret hideout? To have somewhere to hide when someone gets too pissed at us for some reason. "Trust me, there will be angry pirates in the future," Ace grinned. And not to mention Joker is still out there. He growled in a low voice, his fist shaking in anger and fear. He was angry at himself for not being strong enough to protect his brothers. He knew he wasn't strong enough to take that man down as he was right now. He also feared what the warlord would do to them if they were ever found. It's a precaution. At least we can hide ourselves if we have to, Sabo said sadly, looking to Luffy, who was running around the place, attempting to show Marco everything. And this Marco's room. Luffy pointed to one of the doors overhead. Marco raised an eyebrow. You have a door to my room, Yoi. Why? And how did he not know when they did that? Just because. Ace shrugged. If it makes you feel better. There are doors to every room in the ship. And what happened to invasion of privacy, Yoi? It's not like we'll be listening in on private conversations or anything, Ace said. And we'll know if someone is in there. And we won't go in. The commander could only sigh at that. Then Marco walked over to a bag full of unused things and frowned in confusion at what he saw. What are these for, Yoi? He asked warily. Ace and Sabo gave him an evil grin. You'll see. You have way too much free time. Maybe I should add more chores to your schedules, Yoi. Marco shook his head in exasperation. Divided by. Early the next morning, the crew members who were still asleep woke up to a shrill scream. Everyone ran to where the commotion was, weapons drawn, all expecting B to under attack. But what they found instead was a man covered in blue paint and glitter in the doorway to the galley, where a few of the already awake men were eating breakfast. The man covered in glitter started cursing up a storm and demanded to know who did it, as everyone else laughed at his expense. The man looked around, and his eyes landed on the only three who weren't laughing but shoving their faces full of food, feeling eyes on them. The three boys looked up and laughed the hardest, spraying pieces of food all over the table. The man took a step, and the boys hurried to get up and run out of the room, prompting the man to run after them to the open deck. They were gone, nowhere in sight, but he could still hear them laughing from somewhere. Marco smiled to himself as he walked back to his room to finish up some work. Now he knew what those things were for. I wouldn't try that on any of the commanders, Yoi, he said to his empty room, knowing the boys could hear him. The trapdoor in his room opened up, and the heads of the three boys popped up. They were all grinning. Okay, they sang. Just trying to line things up, Ace added before they dropped back down. By the afternoon, there were a few more casualties from various parts of the ship. Whitebeard hadn't ever seen his family laugh or yell so much in one day before. It was a nice sight, even if some of his sons looked ready to kill their own siblings. Everyone was more lively, even the targeted ones. A few even laughed at themselves. Whitebeard looked to the deck when he heard the two older boys yell for Luffy. That's right, today was bath day. He was pleasantly surprised that the boys enjoyed being clean and took regular baths without being told. Twice a week at that. He watched in amusement as the youngest ran out laughing. Once again without his clothes and still dripping wet. At least it looked like all the soap had been washed off this time. The first bath took everyone by surprise. There were squeals, screams, and yells coming from the bath area. It was concerning enough that Marco had to check up on them. As soon as the door was opened, Luffy had shot out of the room, screaming as if his life was in danger. It was too bad that he still had soap bubbles all over him and slipped on deck. Luckily, someone was there to stop the boy from running again and marched him back to Marco, who had been too shocked at the state of the bathroom to do anything. Marco had told him about how the bathroom looked like a hurricane had gone through it. The captain smiled at the memory and looked back down to where Sabo was yelling for Luffy to stop, while half carrying and half dragging a large towel, and Ace had some clothes in hand. They were both chasing their wet, naked brother. Whitebeard chuckled when Sabo tripped over the towel, and Ace ran past him. The crew members out on deck laughed at the usual routine. One even called out to the boy, "Hey, kid, you forgot your clothes." Luffy skidded to a stop and looked down at himself, and his eyes widened in realization. "Ace, you forgot my clothes," he turned to declare to his brother just as Ace tackled him to the floor. "Damn it, Luffy, every single time. How do you even forget to dry yourself and put on clothes?" Sabo finally caught up with them and towel-dried Luffy so Ace could dress him. "Geez, Luffy," Sabo said with a crooked smile, "you get excited when you pick out your clothes and then forget to put them on. If you catch a cold, Kobato's going to yell at us again." They were always getting a lecture from their doctor every time they come back from an island all scratched up and bruised. The two older boys found it funny that Luffy liked to randomly pick between boys' clothes and girls' dresses. Today he went with boys' clothing, a simple t-shirt and jeans. "There you are," the first man to be pranked yelled as he charged at them. He was finally cleaned up, but the glitter seemed to want to stay in his hair. The three boys looked up in surprise before Ace and Sabo grabbed Luffy and ran in a seemingly random direction on the ship. Sabo stomped on a spot on the deck, and a door opened up, allowing the boys to jump down. All the men on deck stared at the spot in shock, then looked up to Whitebeard, who laughed loudly. "Those boys sure do know how to liven up a place," he declared as he walked away. "I just want to know how to get all this shiny stuff off me," the man practically whined. Really, after a few days, almost everyone on board had given up chasing the boys and just laughed it all off and generally enjoyed themselves. "Hey, Sabo," Marco called in his room one morning. "Morning, Marco," Luffy greeted as he climbed through the floor with his brothers right behind him. The three were always together. If you called one, you get three. The whole cotton candy incident was the first and only time they weren't seen together. "You need something, Marco?" Sabo asked as the three of them took a seat on Marco's bed. "Yeah, I was wondering if you could make a few more of those paint pistols, Yoi," Marco said as he took a seat at his desk. "Sure, but what for?" "I was thinking we should add some time for training. We're getting close to New World, and I want to make sure you'll be able to take care of yourselves, Yoi. New World is a whole different level than here in Paradise. I would have started the training earlier, Yoi, but I didn't want to overwhelm you since you were getting used to living here." "But why the paint pistols?" Ace questioned. "A test to see how good you are with different types of weapons." "Oh, yeah, Yoi. No more study lessons. We're pirates. There's only so much we can teach Luffy, Yoi. The important thing is that Luffy can read now." "Kind of. Whatever." Marco scowled inwardly. Teaching Luffy had to be the most strenuous thing he's ever done. The kid had the attention span of a rock. He'd rather train a monkey to do tricks than to teach Luffy anything. He'll just leave that to the two older brats. "Me and Ace used to use pipes when we hunted with Dadden, so we're pretty good with something like that. But we can use just about anything, kind of." "Luffy," Sabo trailed off as he tilted his head in thought. "Well, Luffy is good with anything you give him." "Nice way of putting it," Ace grinned. "What's that supposed to mean, Yoi?" "What else could it mean?" Ace crossed his arms with a serious face. "Luffy is good with anything you give him. He's just no good with hand-to-hand. He can imitate moves, but there's no real impact. He's got no muscles." "I know. I've watched you guys spar, Yoi." Marco knew what it meant, but the way the boys said it, he was sure there was more to it than what was said. He'll just have to wait and find out eventually. "If you really want to gauge how good we are, you could always dump us off on an enemy pirate ship," Sabo suggested with a sly grin. "We're better when we fight together. We've taken down a ship of 20 men before. I don't know if we've been in New World yet or not, though. We never knew where we were," Ace said. "Not going to happen, Yoi. We may be pirates, but most of us here don't like seeing brats like you in a fight. Pops just wants to make sure you boys can at least defend yourselves is all, Yoi." Pops was actually thinking about staying in this half of Grand Line a little longer. But Garp said the Marines are getting antsy with us being here for too long. Divided by. Marco. Luffy popped his head up through the trapdoor in Thatch's room a week later. Thatch jumped and fell off his chair as he grabbed his heart in fright. And that girlish shriek didn't happen. Marco didn't bother looking at the boy as he continued to write something down on Thatch's desk. "Luffy," he greeted, having gotten used the boy's random entrance. "Sabo's done," Luffy announced. "Okay," Marco replied back distractedly. "Does he always do that?" Thatch asked after the kid left. He got off the floor and set his chair back where it should be and sat back down. "They all do, Yoi," came the distracted answer. "Now, about this." Marco brought Thatch back to what they were working on. "Hey, brats, come here and bring those things I asked for, Yoi," Marco called out from the deck one morning. "You think they can hear you?" Vista asked. "Where are they anyway?" "We can hear just fine," came a muffled reply before a door opened up from the deck floor. All of the commanders had come out of curiosity when they heard Marco ask Aizu to help the boys with something. Now they were watching in surprise at the hole opening up in the floor and the three boys climbing out of it. "So that's how you've been popping up everywhere," Haruta said in amusement, wondering how he hadn't noticed them coming and going through the hidden door before. "Got one for every room," Sabo said proudly as he handed 3 pistols to Marco. Haruta crouched down to where the hole had been. He knocked on the floor a few times, trying to figure out how it worked. "You'll never open that door," Ace said with a smug expression as Luffy giggled by his side. Haruta turned to innocent, naive little Luffy in hopes for an answer. "Do you know how this thing works?" "It's a mystery door," the boy cheered. Flamenco had to keep himself from laughing at his brother's curiosity. The boys wanted to keep the doors a surprise, so he wasn't going to tell anyone how they worked or where they were placed. Not that he could fit in them himself. The one in the kids' room was the only one big enough for him to fit into anyway. "These aren't the same as the one you showed me before, Yoi." Marco's voice distracted the 12th Division commander from asking more questions about the doors. "You said we'd be training, so I left it mostly intact. It still fires off paint, though." As if to prove his point, Sabo took one gun and fired a shot at the cabin's wall. "I think they have about 100 shots each." "You left the recoil, Yoi." Marco raised an eyebrow at how the boy's arm reeled back a little. "You said you wanted to know how good we are with them, so I left it mostly intact." "And mostly for Luffy," Sabo explained. "Why? You know he's not strong enough to handle that sort of recoil, Yoi." Marco knew. With the boy's lack of muscle strength, Luffy wouldn't be able to stand after shooting around with this type of pistol. He should have told the boy to use a more light-weighted pistol. "Luffy can handle it," Ace said as he dragged Luffy with him to where their other brother was. All right, then. How are your aims with these yoi? Marco asked as he led them down the plank and onto an island they docked at, with all the commanders following. Good enough. We get the job done, Sabo answered with a shrug. Marco sighed. Not the answer I wanted, yoi. He pointed to a tree. Aim for that black spot. Getting the idea, Ace and Sabo raised their weapon and took aim, with Luffy looking at them before mimicking them. While the two older boys slightly flinched after firing their shots, Luffy went rolling backwards, head over heels. Blue and red paint dotted the tree trunk, both inches away from their intended target, and a yellow spot a few feet above. Sabo quickly ran over to Luffy and helped him back to his feet. Luffy, you were supposed to aim for the black spot. The really big one right there. He bent his head next to his brothers so they would be eye level and pointed at the target. Oh, the boy's eye widens. Ops, wrong black spot. He took his stance again from where he stood, which was a few feet further away. Marco placed a hand over his eyes and shook his head. He looked back up after the next shot went off and saw Luffy rolling back again. Why did that brat leave the recoil for the poor boy? He turned his head to the tree to see yellow right in the center of the spot he'd chosen as their target. Marco, Kindu called out after inspecting the tree. The kid's first shot was actually spot on. He nailed a fly. The large man pointed to the first yellow that Luffy had shot. Marco wasn't the only one shocked by the extreme accuracy the boy had. Everyone, with the exception of the two older brothers, were speechless. Thatch laughed. You did say black spot on the tree. Marco turned to the boys. I still don't see why you left those guns as they were if Luffy's just going to roll off after each shot. That's just creating an opening for enemies to take advantage of yoi. Sabo scratched his head as he hummed, thinking of a good way to explain the reason. Not quite sure how to explain it. Let's just say that Luffy uses anything and everything to his advantage. We've rarely had to worry about it before, right? Fine, yoi. Marco sighed once more and ran a hand through his hair. No point in trying to understand the kids. He'd just have to wait until the end to point the problems out to them. I'm actually no good with guns, so I'm going to have you go at it with Izo yoi. He waved the cross-dresser over. Who's going first? I am, Ace said as he walked and stopped a few feet in front of Izo. Marco took a gun from one of the other boys and gave it to Izo. Stop when you're both out of ammo, or when you hit something vital. Out of ammo is 6 shots. Your field is within a 15-feet radius, and I will know if you go out of bounds. The match started as soon as Marco reached Sabo and Luffy's side. The first thing Ace did was to jump high into the trees, using the foliage as coverage. He then jumped to another branch and another to distract the commander. Once he got behind the man, Ace fired a shot. Izo was told not to use haki during their little training session but was still able to dodge the red paint fire. It was a poor aim that was going towards his feet. Nonetheless, not wanting the boy to think it'd be easy, he took a step to the left and turned around to fire where the shot came from. Ack! Ace fell from the tree, crashing into the bush below. That's not fair, he moaned as he detangled himself from the bush. There was bright red mark in the middle of his forehead. That would have worked on an average person. Izo stated, if you can control your aim. Maybe we should have asked a non-commander to do this instead. Well, that didn't last long, Sabo sighed in dread when Ace tagged him in. The match with Sabo started and ended similar to Ace's. I think he's cheating, Sabo grumbled as he dusted his pants. I wasn't cheating, Izo defended himself. You both have lousy aim. Neither one of you would have been able to hit me anywhere important, even if I didn't move. It's okay, Sabo. Ace gave his brother a confident grin. It's Luffy's turn. Time for revenge. Luffy, you better win this round for us. Sabo gave the smaller boy an encouraging smile. Okay, Luffy cheered as he bounced over to stand in front of Izo. Izo, the man turned his attention to Marco. You can use haki with this kid yoi. You sure about that? He's just a tiny shrimp. I don't want to be called a cheater again, especially when I didn't cheat to begin with. Trust me. Marco gave the other two boys creepy grin a thoughtful look. And it's not cheating if he's using it too. And take this. He tossed the man the other paint pistol he took from Sabo. To line things up yoi. He smirked at Izo's disbelief. My turn. My turn. Luffy sang as he bounced around in front of Izo in excitement, carelessly waving his pistol in the air over his head. Sure, sure, Izo smiled fondly at the boy. Seeing the boy wasn't stopping his strange dance of joy, Izo took aim at the oblivious boy. It'd be the boy's own fault for not paying attention. Instead of landing the hit like he'd expected, the red paint landed a few feet behind the still dancing boy instead. It had to be a coincidence. Izo shot off both pistols in his hand in succession. He was sure at least one would hit since the boy had his back to him. Instead, the red and blue paint ended up flying past the boy's head as he continued to dance. Izo glared at the two snickering boys who were with the rest of the commanders. He turned his eyes back to the boy in front of him. Luffy, you do know that our match has already started, don't you? He asked patiently. Oh, it is. Luffy tilted his head, causing the boys at the sideline to laugh harder. Okay. It was then that the cheerful boy's face went from all carefree smiles to something more alarming. Aizo didn't know how to describe it, except that it was like all trace of emotions left the boy. Instead of jumping to the trees like his brothers did, Luffy charged straight at Aizo and tripped over his own feet. The man took advantage of that and fired, wanting to get this done and over with, but missed when the boy used his hand to flip himself over and upright and continued to run past him and into the bushes. Using Haki, Aizo tried to locate the boy, but nothing showed, other than the others at the sideline. He held both pistols up and readied them. He dodged a shot that came too close to his face, then another and another, each one coming too close for comfort from different directions, making it harder for him to pick out where the boy was. Aizo grinned in victory when the sixth projectile was sent in his direction. He vaguely heard Ace and Sabo telling Marco to not end the match yet. Then, from his left, Luffy came out of the bushes and charged at him once more, foregoing the pistol still in his hand. The boy launched himself at Aizo with a kick aimed at the man's head. Aizo quickly, with practiced ease, placed one of his weapons into his sash and grabbed the boy's leg before it made contact. "You used all 6 of your shots, brat," Aizo said with the boy dangling upside down in front of his face. The kid had the audacity to aim the pistol at his face. "But you didn't." Luffy grinned with a face that the commander never want to see on the boy ever again. Luffy pointed to where Aizo had placed his second gun earlier. It was no longer there. Then he saw another gun, abandoned right in front of his feet. "Shit," Aizo tossed the boy, just as red brushed his cheek. Luffy rolled to a stance and fired once more, only to topple back and roll away as Aizo sidestepped the shot. The man took aim at the rolling boy but was stopped by Marco. "Why'd you stop it?" Aizo demanded. "Look at your chest, Yoi." The 16th Division commander looked down to see a red stain right over his heart. How? By now the 2 older boys were on the floor clutching their stomach from laughing so hard. Aizo looked at Marco for an explanation. The kid took another shot in mid-recoil roll Yoi. The crossdresser looked at Luffy, who was still trying to shake off the dizziness from the last roll. "You've got to be kidding," Aizo deadpanned. He had heard the last shot but thought it was a wild shot, not a well-aimed one. "No," Ace said as he wiped the tears from his eyes. "That's why we kept the recoil. He uses anything and everything to his advantage," Sabo repeated himself, panting from the laugh. "If anyone thinks to shoot him while he's rolling away, it'd be too late." "So, you're saying it's planned, Yoi?" Marco asked in interest. He didn't think the brat could even form a plan, much less aim from that strange position. "No," Ace finally caught his breath back. "Luffy doesn't know how to think like that. Luffy's just unpredictable." Aizo thought back on every shot the boy fired and realized that each one of them would have been dead on if Aizo wasn't as skilled as he was. That was certainly entertaining. "You're good with that, brat," he complimented the boy. "Maybe you should start carrying one around for protection. New World is a lot more dangerous than Paradise. Something not as heavy-weighted. I may have something in my room." He mumbled the last half to himself. "Wait, then how did he not roll away while he was hiding in the bushes?" Kingdu asked. "The tree," Luffy answered. He jumped up to a branch and braced his back to the trunk to show them what he did. "All right, you said you can use just about anything, right, Yoi?" Marco asked as he held out a sword to hand over to them. Sabo and Ace looked at each other before Sabo turned back to answer. "We can, but we're actually not all that good with swords. We just swing that thing around and hope to hit something." "I see. That might be too dangerous then." He placed the sword down and picked up a bow staff. "You said you can use this, right, Yoi?" The 2 older boys' eyes lit up. "That, we can use," Ace said as he took the offered staff and swung it around, testing it. "A little lighter than what we're used to, but we can use this." "Right, I forgot, Yoi. You mentioned hunting with pipes before." Ace and Sabo nodded. "Okay, then. This time you'll spar with me, Yoi." Marco walked out to take Aizo's place with Ace following. "Aren't you going to use one too?" Ace asked. "No, I don't usually fight with weapons," Marco answered. "Don't worry about holding back, Yoi. Just come at me like you would an enemy." "Oh, well, okay then." Ace smirked as he made the first move. He swung his staff up and then down towards Marco's head. But the man was much faster and easily dodged. Marco was impressed at how well Ace was able to handle the bow staff. The boy was even able to withstand his kicks that were blocked with the staff. He knew the kid was strong. Now he knew how strong. He continued attacking and giving the boy room to attack back. At one point, he kicked the staff out of the boy's hand, only for the Ace to completely ignore the weapon and attacked him with his bare fist. Marco had thought Ace would retrieve the staff. The spar continued on with Marco kicking, and Ace throwing whatever he could at the man, before Marco kicked Ace hard enough to send him towards his brothers. "That's it." Marco ended the match. "Not bad, Yoi," he smirked at the boy. "We'll have to work on your speed though." Next, Yoi. Sabo left Ace, who was rubbing his sore spot, with Luffy and grabbed the forgotten staff on the ground. Marco found that the 2 older boys had similar fighting style. Basically, anything goes. They fight dirty if they have to, aiming for places normal people wouldn't dare to think to hit. He dodged a thrust to his midsection before kicking the staff, but Sabo was more persistent in holding onto his weapon. Marco didn't get the chance to unarm Sabo and ended the match in the same manner he did his brother, kicking him towards where his brothers were. Marco put down his leg and frowned. Where'd the other two brats go? Luffy got hungry, Vista answered. Looked like Ace fell asleep or something, so the brat dragged him over and complained about being hungry and wanting food. Thatch took them back to the ship for some snacks. I'm surprised Ace didn't wake up after being manhandled like that, Haruta winced. I mean, the shrimp was literally dragging him by the arm. We told him to leave his brother to sleep here, but he insisted Ace wanted food too. Sabo looked around, thinking his two brothers would still be around. Really, I'm more surprised that Luffy left me. I'm not surprised he took Ace with him. This is the second time he's left without the both of us. Sabo smiled at that. Maybe he'll finally learn to be on his own. I mean, we've never left Luffy alone before, unless he was too injured and unconscious, but we'd always be by his side before he woke up. Even better, he looked at them with a bigger smile. He said what he wanted to someone that wasn't us. Marco ruffled the boy's hair. It only took him 8 months to do that, Yoi. They all headed back to the ship and towards the galley, and he can read and write now. Little by little, he's growing, Yoi. You two are doing great. Sabo felt himself blush. Never in his life did he ever think he would feel this proud about raising a child at his age. Not to mention, he and Ace were children themselves. It wasn't easy, but he knew Ace would agree with him that Luffy made them proud. The second they walked into the galley, Luffy ran over to Sabo with a slab of meat in hand and gave him a greasy hug. Sabo patted him on the head and asked if Ace was awake yet. I'm awake, Ace grumbled from his spot at a table in front of Thatch. There was a huge pile of food before him, but he had his head on the table. Sabo sat down next to him and started eating with Luffy. You fall asleep again. Ugh, don't remind me. I woke up to Luffy trying to feed me. Not sure how he did it, but I'm actually full. Awa, don't say it like that. Your little brother thought it'd be nice to feed you before he fed himself. Thatch grinned. The rest of the group took a seat with the boys and Thatch. The commanders had nothing planned for the day, so they all decided to take the day to spend with their youngest shipmates and get to know them better. Again, Marco asked. Luffy calls them nap attacks, Ace mumbled. That's the third time I just fell asleep out of nowhere. Oh, this is the first I'm hearing about this, Yoi. Marco raised an eyebrow at him. Ace turned his head away with a blush. Didn't think it was important. Ace, Sabo smiled brightly. Ace's head turned his way. You do realize that Luffy dragged you here without me, right? Yeah, his brother said fondly, before scowling. That explains why I'm so sore. So how did you do? Sorry I missed it. I didn't drop my staff, Sabo said proudly. You two have the same fighting style, Marco said. I'm guessing you learned together. Yeah, Sabo answered. We fought and hunted together before ... Well, yeah. And Luffy, how is he with his staff? Haruta asked. Don't know. Never had a chance to give him one to use, Ace shrugged. But probably wouldn't hurt anyone since he has no muscles. Might leave some bruises, though. Marco agreed. They'll have to work on that. Whitebeard pirates are known as the strongest. But they were pirates, nonetheless. The kids will need to learn to take care of themselves eventually. After you finish eating, I want to do a few tests on this nap attack of yours, Ace, Izo said. It may not be anything serious, but it doesn't hurt to know what's going on with your body. Brats, Whitebeard drawled, as he closed the door to his room and walked over to take a seat on his bed. He chuckled in amusement as Luffy popped his head up from the floor. He'd watched them when they made the door and even gave them permission to add the listening tube to his room. They told him where it was so he could plug it up if he wanted to talk about something he didn't want them to listen in on. Hi, old man, the boy greeted and crawled out of the hole to let his brothers through. You need something? Sabo asked. This wouldn't be the first time Whitebeard called them to do some errands for him. How is your training going? Whitebeard gestured for them to sit with him on his bed. Luffy quickly ran over and sat in his usual place on Whitebeard's knee. Hard to say, Ace said. Marco's way stronger than we are, and we have nothing to compare ourselves to. Marco turns pretty when he let us hit him. Luffy threw his arms out in a cheer as he talked about Marco's devil fruit ability. I hear you wouldn't let Luffy learn how to use any weapons. Yeah, Sabo answered. We figured Luffy needs to work on his strength. Truthfully, we don't like seeing him use weapons. It just reminds us of before, and he doesn't need to learn how to use them. He already knows how to use them. Whitebeard nodded. He understood what the boy meant. Even if he's never really seen them fight, he's sure that it's a sight they don't want to see again. Seeing a young boy they've practically raised themselves doing things they don't like would bring bad memories. I hear you have narcolepsy, Ace. Nap attack. Yeah, no idea where they came from. Never had them before. Ace shrugged it off as unimportant. It doesn't sound like this narcohatsit is life-threatening. Do you like it here? Yes, Ace gave the big man a small smile. The people are nice. No one's asked us anything we don't want to answer. Sabo nodded. Ace and I have always dreamed of being a pirate. You've given us that and freedom. You don't know how much this means to us. You wanted to be pirates. At such a young age. Pirates are free. Luffy cheered with his arms up in the air. Isn't it so? Whitebeard grinned. We told Luffy stories about pirates. Even before we got stuck in that place, all we ever wanted was freedom, Ace said, looking to the floor. Ace had to hide so the government wouldn't find him, and I had to hide from my parents. At least here, there are people that know we exist, Sabo said. We're tired of running and hiding. Then you might not like what I'm about to say. Whitebeard frowned. Why? Both of the older boys asked, dreading what Whitebeard was going to tell them. We're nearing Sabo Archipelago. I need you three to stay on the ship and out of sight. Basically, stay under the ship until we leave there. That place may seem like a grand place, but it has its dark side. Sabayati is close to Mariewa, where world nobles live. Slavery, Sabo growled. I've heard of the place from my parents. Whitebeard nodded. As such, I want you to stay away from there and out of trouble. We're fine with that. Ace crossed his arms. It's better than going back. I like my freedom, thank you very much. Also, everyone will have to be off the ship, so it'll just be you three. There will be someone I trust that will be coming on board to coat the ship. Even then, I want you three to stay hidden. What do you mean coat the ship? Sabo asked. In order to cross Red Line into New World, ships need to be coated in order to travel underwater. Whitebeard looked amused as the boy's eyes widened. Travel underwater. You can travel underwater, Ace said in wonder. Yes, come on deck once we depart to experience it. It truly is something else. The boys cheered at seeing something new. It was like another adventure. They couldn't wait. Also, the stern voice caused the boys to be quiet. I've let you guys wander off on your own at each island before, but after we get to New World, you won't be able to do that as often. A commander will be with you everywhere you go. New World is nothing like paradise. There are more dangers out there. The pirates and marines are much stronger, and the islands are more dangerous. The boys nodded in understanding. They may be losing some of their freedom, but Whitebeard was only looking out for their well-being. At least they're no longer slaves ordered around to do mindless killings. They were still free. Is it possible for you to buy something for us then? Sabo asked. We were planning to do some shopping. What is it you need? A hammock big enough for the three of us and some blankets. We want to sleep in our hideout, but it gets too cold at night. All right, I'll have Marco get those for you. They all gone, Luffy whispered sadly. This was the quietest the ship had ever been. Even when they docked at an island, there would still be people on board doing things here and there. Never before had it been this quiet on Moby Dick. It was unnerving. It's okay, Ace patted Luffy's head. The old man said they'd be back by dinner. At least Thatch left us lunch, Sabo commented as he rubbed his arm uncomfortably. I'm bored, Luffy whined. Nobody to play with. More like no one to yell at them for pulling a prank. Let's take a nap then, Ace suggested. Anything else they did would just be too noisy in the quiet ship and alert anyone nearby that the ship wasn't as empty as it should be. Just as they were making themselves comfortable on the floor of their hideout with a bunch of blankets Marco had given them, they heard someone climb onto the ship. Curious, they climbed back up the ladder and walked along a beam right under the deck. They could hear the person walking until he was right over them. Strange, they heard the man say. Thought Whitebeard said everyone was off the ship. Ace and Sabo gave each other a wide-eyed look, realizing that the man somehow knew they were still on board. Probably that hacky thing Marco said Luffy could do. Seems you've gotten yourself some guardian angels. Moby, the man laughed and continued his walk. Sabo mimed to Ace his thought of how the man was crazy for talking to the ship as if it were alive. The boys followed, staying as quiet as they could. The man walked about the deck and into the cabins, opening and closing doors as if checking each room. The boys winced at a loud noise and the painful yelp. Ace and Sabo looked at each other with wide eyes. They had forgotten about that trap. All the others were taken down before everyone left, per Marco's instructions. Ace opened up the trapdoor in the sleeping quarter hallway and peeked through. He saw an old man hanging uncomfortably in their net trap right in front of the 4th Division's sleeping quarter. Ah, you there? The man looked right at Ace. Would you be so kind as to lend me a hand, please? Ace continued to look at the man for a few more moments before hesitantly climbing out and walking over. Again, he looked at the man, trying to decide if he really should help him out or not. You're the ship coder, right? The man laughed. That's right. The name's Rayleigh. Figuring the man wouldn't harm them since Whitebeard said he trusted him, Ace pulled a rope and released the man, who flipped and landed on his own 2 feet. You must be one of Moby's guardian angels, Rayleigh said as he dusted his pants. Ace, he answered, remembering Sabo lecturing him about his manners, as he eyed Rayleigh warily. The man nodded before tilting his head in the direction of where Sabo and Luffy were peeping through the door Ace had used. And the other two. Ace glared at his 2 brothers for showing themselves, trying to decide if he should answer or not. But Luffy opened the door all the way and climbed out and ran over to hug Ace. Luffy, that's my brother, Sabo. He pointed to the blonde walking over to them. Sabo bowed in front of the man. Sorry about that. We forgot to take it down and didn't think you'd be walking around the ship. Ace followed suit and pushed Luffy into a bow as well. Rayleigh waved at them dismissively and laughed. Don't worry about it. I was just doing an inspection before I start my coding. By the way, what are you boys doing here? The old man said to stay on the ship. Ace said, holding onto Luffy's hand. I see. I meant, why are you on this ship with Whitebeard? The boys gave the man a cautious look before running back to the trapdoor. None of your business, Ace yelled before slamming the door shut. Rayleigh scratched his head before he realized something. There aren't any more of those traps, are there? He called out to them. It's not like he couldn't get out of them easily. He just wanted to see who was still on the ship when he was told everyone had left. No, came Ace and Sabo's muffled shout back from under him. The three kids followed the man from within their secret hideout, curious about the strange old man who talked to himself. Divided by. Rayleigh was under the sea, coating the bottom of the ship. When Luffy whispered that more people were coming towards the ship, they froze where they were in the back of the ship as they heard quiet footsteps on the deck, hoping the newcomers were just the ship coder's helpers. Are you sure they're on this ship? They heard one say. I'm positive. I overheard some of Whitebeard's men talking about 3 kids they left on the ship, and they sounded a lot like those 3 brats that ran from Joker, don't you think? The boys went pale at the mentioned name. Doesn't matter. If it's not them, we can still bring them back. I'm sure Joker wouldn't mind replacements. So, how do we get them to come out? I don't think they'd willingly come out to greet us. Easy. Destroy everything, one suggested. We'll fish them out eventually. But this is Whitebeard's ship. There's no way we can fight them. Don't be stupid. The ship is empty. If there is anyone here, it'd be some wimpy coder. They all laughed in agreement. The 3 boys quietly landed on the floor of the ship. What do we do? Sabo whispered urgently. And they jumped at the sound of wood cracking, a cold sensation running down Ace and Sabo's back. Damn it, the ship, Ace said as he ran towards the trapdoor leading to the training room with his brothers following. Ace and Sabo both grabbed a bow staff before running out to the deck. Luffy, used to always being handed his weapon, didn't know what to do and just followed his brothers in grabbing a staff. Stop it, Ace yelled at them. It may not be their ship, but this ship was his and his brother's safe haven. He wasn't about to let anything happen to it if he could do something about it. Sabo and Luffy were right behind him and saw parts of the upper and lower cabin had a huge chunk taken out. Though, decided to come out of hiding, did you? One sneered as another took out a piece of paper from his pocket and looked at it. That's them. He showed the paper to the others. Ace, Sabo, and Luffy. We're not going back, Sabo growled, gripping his staff with determination. All the men laughed at them. What can a bunch of kids do? All the men drew their swords and charged at them. Ace and Sabo jumped over each one, dodging every attack and knocking some down. Luffy rushed right up to one and jumped up to swing his staff at the man but had his staff knocked out of his hands. The man easily grabbed him in midair, but Luffy bit the man's hand, stealing the sword that was dropped in the process. Armed once more, Luffy attacked with determination. There was no way he wanted to go back to the way it was before Moby Dick. He remembered how hurt his brothers looked every time he woke up after his punishments. There was no way he wanted Ace and Sabo to be hurt again. They were free, and he was going to do everything he could to keep it that way. Now that he's had a taste of freedom, he intended to keep it. He'd taken down 2 men when there was a yelp of pain from one of his brothers. Hold it right there. Runts, one man called out, causing everyone to stop. He held a pistol right at Ace's head. The young brunette was hissing in pain from the bullet that had grazed his right shoulder. Damn it, Ace grunted as he held onto his bleeding shoulder. Ace, both Sabo and Luffy yelled in horror. No one make a move, the man with the pistol said. Drop your weapons. He looked at the last remaining man and tilted his head in Luffy's direction once the sword left the boy's hands. If you do anything, I'm going to blow this kid's head off. The man grinned evilly as he walked towards Luffy with a stone collar, one that Luffy recognized all too easily. It may be a little bigger than the one he had before, but he knew what it was. They all looked the same regardless of their size. Luffy took a shaky step back, only to be warned by the man with the gun, and the next thing he knew, the collar was on his neck. It was heavy. He didn't like it. He wanted it off. He'd finally learned what freedom was. He didn't want to go back. Sabo and Ace looked at Luffy in fear. They could see the life in Luffy's eyes disappear, leaving just 2 dead black eyes looking at nothing. Luffy had shut down. They'd never seen Luffy in this state before. It was unnerving. Luffy, they breathed, feeling lost. Ace cursed himself for not being able to protect his brothers and even causing them to be caught once again. It was all his fault. The 2 men who hadn't been taken out yet laughed. It's just like the executive officers said. You catch one, and you get 2 free. The man standing next to Ace lowered his gun, laughing. Let's go. He walked away from the boys, knowing they would follow now that one of them had the bomb collar that was in their control. Sabo walked next to Ace, supporting him as Ace walked sluggishly from blood loss, with Luffy in front of them. They all, with the exception of Luffy, turned their heads to the side of the ship when they heard the sound of something splashing. Oh, what's going on here? Rayleigh asked as he casually pulled himself onto the ship. His eyes trailed across the deck, seeing the bodies lying about the deck, 2 dead and 3 unconscious. Then he took in the rest of his surroundings and noticed the state the boys were in and Luffy's collar. We're just taking back what's ours," the man who put the collar on Luffy stated. Ace and Sabo both looked down in shame. They were runaway slaves. Slaves are property. The three of them belonged to Doflamingo. "I'm afraid those kids are Whitebeards," Rayleigh said with amusement. "They were ours to begin with. We're just reclaiming what's ours." The man who had the gun on Ace turned to Luffy. "First things first. Kill this old man." Luffy, Sabo tried to stop the boy, but his brother just walked past without acknowledging them. The two men grinned as Luffy emotionlessly picked up a sword that was dropped earlier. "Luffy, was it?" Rayleigh asked as he brought a hand to his chin and hummed in thought, then nodded to himself. "I see. Boy, aren't you a pirate?" Rayleigh said to Luffy. "Pirates are free. They do what they want, be it good or bad. Pirates belong to no one but the sea. They take orders from no one but their captain. Isn't Whitebeard your captain?" Luffy stopped right in front of Rayleigh, life and understanding slowly coming back to his eyes as the old man continued to talk. "For as long as I've known Whitebeard, once he takes you in, you are considered part of his family. You are one of his sons. You have many, many older siblings to watch over you. Is this what you want? Do you want to leave your family behind?" Luffy looked up at the man with tears in his eyes and shook his head. "I want to stay here." His voice trembled as tears streamed down his face. "I like it here. I want to stay here with my brothers." Rayleigh smiled. "Good. Now, to take care of this thing." Rayleigh touched the collar, causing it to tick. The small boy flinched and closed his eyes in fear. The next thing Luffy knew, the weight of the collar was off his shoulders, and there was an explosion off to the side, over the ocean. Blinking, Luffy brought his hands over his neck to find the collar gone. Rayleigh looked up at the men as they whispered between themselves. "I recognize him now. He's Dark King Rayleigh, the Pirate King's first mate. What's someone like him doing here? We better tell Joker." The man with the gun now had Ace and Sabo at gunpoint. "Don't forget we still have your friends here. Hurry up, and get rid of that old man so we can leave," the man demanded, confident that they could still get away. As soon as the Dark King was distracted by the kid, they'd run with or without the kids. At least they have information on the kids to give to Joker. Feeling conflicted but not wanting his brothers to be harmed because of him, Luffy raised his sword again. But Rayleigh knocked the weapon from his hands and was no longer near him. Looking around at the sound of shock, he saw the older man now standing in between his brothers and the man threatening them, who was now holding his hand in pain with the pistol lying uselessly on the ground. That had the remaining intruders shaking. With the new knowledge that he couldn't beat the man before them, he took off running. But Luffy was faster than the out-of-shape man. The boy dashed across the deck, grabbing another sword on his way. The surprise of feeling strong murderous intent coming from such a small body stopped Rayleigh from going after the retreating figure. "You're not telling Pink Bastard anything," Luffy said darkly as he killed the man quickly. He stood over the body for a moment before stabbing his sword into the body when he heard Sabo call out Ace's name and ran over to them. Ace had collapsed to his knees. "Ace," Luffy skidded to his knees in front of his brothers. "What's wrong, Ace?" "I'm fine, just a little dizzy," Ace breathed and looked up at his youngest brother with a smile. "You did good, Luffy." Luffy dipped his head as his brother lifted his hand to rub the boy's head. "Looks like you need another bath, though." Luffy looked down and saw the blood spots that splattered on him. "Let's get you bandaged up first and clean this place before that bath," Rayleigh said as he picked Ace up. "Otherwise, I won't be able to finish my job." Divided by. Whitebeard and Marco could see Moby Dick between the large trees. Once they got close enough, they could tell something had happened, if the pile of bloodied bodies was anything to go by. Marco quickly transformed his arms into fiery wings and flew the rest of the way to the deck. He could hear the pounding of multiple hammers before landing and saw Rayleigh, Sabo, and Luffy working on repairs to the ship, Ace leaning on a cabin wall, asleep, and 4 unknown men who were glaring at him, tied up. "Rayleigh, what happened, Yoy?" he asked worriedly, walking towards the 3 doing repair work. "Marco," Luffy dropped his hammer, making another hole that needed to be fixed, and ran up to the man to give him a hug around a leg. Marco placed a comforting hand on the boy's head. "And didn't we tell you to stay under, Yoy?" Now, Phoenix," Rayleigh smiled. "Things happened, and it couldn't be helped." By this point, Whitebeard was on board. "Is Ace all right?" The large captain had seen the bandages peeking through the sleeping boy's tank top. "Don't worry, it's just a slight graze. We patched him up." Explanations later, Rayleigh sighed. "First, let's fix this so I can finish your coating first thing in the morning. These boys were kind enough to lend me their hands. Very handy boys you have here. Though, one is better at making holes than the other." Sabo. Marco handed the boy a large bag. "Here are the things you asked for, Yoy. Do you need help putting it up? Let us go. Once Joker finds out about this, you'll be in trouble." One of the tied-up men decided to yell at the intimidatingly large captain. Whitebeard and Marco watched with amusement as Ace got up to kick the man hard enough in the head to knock him unconscious. Sabo's eyes lit up as he took the bag. "Thank you. We may need some help since Ace can't do much with his shoulder like that." Ace glared at him. Not like I asked to get shot at, he mumbled as he went back to his wall to rest. Before long, more crew members came back and were surprised at what they saw. No one asked for too many details about what had happened. They just assumed it was another group of idiots that decided to attack their ship and just help with the repairs, easily ignoring their new captives. Now that they had enough help to repair the ship, Whitebeard asked Rayleigh to come to their meeting room to explain. "Luffy, why don't you stay here and help?" Sabo offered. Luffy looked at him questioningly before he nodded slowly, not really wanting to be away from any of his brothers after this incident. "Don't worry, Luffy," Thatch said as he ruffled the boy's head. "They'll be back out in no time. How about you help me in the kitchen instead? Dinner's gotta be ready in an hour." "You think we can do that?" Luffy cheered as Thatch picked him up and placed him on his shoulders. Helping in the kitchen always means before dinner snacks. And before dinner snacks, Marco, Rayleigh, Sabo, Ace, and the 4 intruders went to the meeting room to talk. The 3 that were on the ship at the time explained everything that had happened. Whitebeard turned his attention to the intruders, leveling them with a glare. "Why does Doflamingo still want the boys? Doesn't he already have enough people to do his dirty work?" One of the men, the one they assumed to be the leader, grinned evilly. "You mean you don't know?" Ace and Sabo flinched, knowing part of the reason. It's the reason why they didn't want Luffy here, to learn that he was the reason all this happened. "That cute little tool you stole from us is Joker's first successful human weapon." "What do you mean?" Whitebeard growled. "Easy, he kidnaps a young, impressionable, innocent kid, hypnotizes the kid, and voila. A killing machine that can easily pick up any fighting style. Our very own unsuspecting assassin." Marco kicked the man in the head hard enough that teeth and blood flew out of his mouth before falling unconscious. The 1st Division commander had heard enough to make his blood boil. How could they do that to children? "I thought I recognized that sword style," Rayleigh said thoughtfully. "I had just assumed he was being taught by Haruta." Whitebeard turned his glare on one of the other still conscious intruders. "Are there any other children?" The man trembled in fear and spilled everything he knew, not wanting to be killed. "No, all the others are dead. That kid is the only survivor. Joker's been keeping an eye on him to track his progress. He wants the kid back after many failed attempts after these 3 ran away. He wants to know why that kid is the only success so he can replicate it." So, Sabo's voice trembled at the information. "He wants Luffy back because..." He couldn't continue that line of thought. Ace swallowed to wet his dry throat. "We thought that he wanted Luffy back only because he's a fast learner, not because. We didn't know he was a test subject." Marco placed a hand on each of the boys' shoulders. "Doflamingo probably doesn't realize that Luffy had you guys to watch over him, Yoi. All the others died because they didn't have brothers like you to raise them. You did great in raising your little brother into the good person that he is now, Yoi. Luffy isn't a mindless killing machine. And because of you, he has a heart, Yoi." The boys blushed and smiled proudly at what they had accomplished. A warm smile appeared on Whitebeard's face, and it dawned on him why the trio hadn't called him Pops yet. It was because they subconsciously knew he wasn't their Pops. It was someone else that they looked to for guidance. While he did put Marco in charge of the brats, he hadn't thought his first commander would take over his position. Oh, how his son was growing. Whitebeard nodded in agreement. "We've seen the boy's progress, and we know what kind of person he is. He's grown so much since we picked you boys up. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We are all children of the sea. Your past doesn't matter here. You are my children, and you boys will be staying here for as long as you want." Ace snickered. That's what this old man said to Luffy. Marco and Whitebeard looked to Rayleigh questioningly. "Just a little pep talk." Rayleigh shrugged and grinned. "So what do we do with these guys?" Marco jerked his thumb to the tied-up men. "Does Doflamingo know the boys' whereabouts?" Whitebeard asked. And no, the last one finally spoke. "Just us. We overheard some of your men talking about some kids on your ship. We didn't tell anyone. I swear. I promise we won't say a thing about them. They're all yours, Marco," Whitebeard said. "Perfect, Yoi." Marco grinned evilly at the men, causing them to shiver in fear. "Marco," Sabo said shyly with Ace right by his side. "We were wondering if you could teach us to use haki. We want to get stronger so we can help Luffy next time." Marco looked to Whitebeard, who nodded. And back to the kids. "Sure thing, Yoi. Just don't be disappointed if you don't get it quickly. It's not something easily learned. In fact, only a quarter of the crew can use it, Yoi." The boys nodded in understanding. "All right, then. We can start tomorrow while we wait for Rayleigh to finish his work, Yoi. I'm sure some of the others wouldn't mind teaching you boys a few moves too. Now that everything's been sorted out, let's go make sure Luffy didn't already eat everything in the kitchen." Marco noticed when he lost Luffy's interest as he explained haki to the trio. The boys' eyes started to wander, exploring what they could from the grove that Moby Dick was anchored in. Before the kid could poke at the bubble that floated up from the ground, Marco called his attention back to them. "Now, pay very careful attention," he told the 2 older boys. "Luffy, avoid all my attacks but no attacking back. Can you do that, Yoi?" Once Luffy nodded in understanding, Marco launched a series of kicks at the boy, a little slower than usual, all of which were easily evaded just by sidestepping them all. That is one way of using observation hack Yoi, Marco explained once he was done. If you know when and where an attack is coming, then they can be easily evaded with minimal movement to conserve energy. Another is one that you already know about Yoi. Luffy, I'm going to go out on a limb on this, but how many people are on this island? Luffy tilted his head for a long moment before he scrunched up his face. Too many. Is the number too high for you to count, Yoi? Or is it because you can't see the whole archipelago? Too many people. But, the boy frowned and thought, Becky is coming with somebody I don't know. Marco paused to look at the boy for a moment, processing what was said about the member of his division. Did you say Becky is coming this way? Luffy nodded. Are you sure? How can you tell it's Becky? It's Becky, the boy said confidently. Becky is Becky. I see, the commander said thoughtfully, before an idea hit him. Do you know where Pops is, Yoi? That way. Luffy pointed somewhere to his left after a short pause. That way. This time he moved his finger slightly to the right. How long until Becky gets here, Yoi? At this point, Marco had already confirmed that someone was indeed heading their way and was about 10 minutes out from them. Soon, Marco sighed and turned back to the two confused boys. What he's demonstrated is a higher form of observation hacky Yoi. I personally have never met anyone who can differentiate who's who. Normally, you can tell when someone is near or where a person is hiding Yoi. I'm actually curious to know if he had this skill before Doflamingo or if that bastard did something. He muttered the last part to himself. Marco continued, I've already explained two forms of hacky. We'll leave armament for next time and focus on observation first. Both of you come and attack me and try to dodge my attacks. Luffy took a seat at the base of the grove and watched them spar before he got bored again. He really did try to pay attention at first but didn't understand what Marco was trying to explain. All he understood was the man was trying to explain this hacky thing, whatever that was. He didn't want to fall asleep because of the unknown person that was coming with the 1st Division member. There was no telling what kind of person they were. Though, the person was with Becky, so it should be safe. He tried his best to stay awake, but he was so bored. There was only so much he could do with the bubbles that kept popping up. So he picked up some rocks around him and started throwing them at Marco to help his brothers out. If he accidentally hit his brothers, well, that was their fault for jumping in the wrong place. He snickered. The next thing he knew, Luffy was enveloped in a bubble that had formed right under him. He stared at it in fascination as it slowly formed and moved up his body. After it covered his small body, it started to float upward with him in it. The boy stared in awe as he continued upward. With a huge smile of excitement, he watched as his brothers and Marco got further and further away, growing smaller and smaller as he floated above them. Then realization hit him. The excitement of an adventure popped, just like the other bubbles around him once he made it above the groves. Panicking, he started crying for his brothers to come and get him. He didn't know how to get back down, and if his bubble popped, he'd fall. He was sure a fall from this height would hurt a lot. If he got hurt, his brothers would be sad. That thought alone made him cry even harder. All of a sudden, a loud pop resounded around him. The sound itself startled him enough to make him stop crying for a second, before he realized what had happened. He then screamed as he began to descend so fast he couldn't open his eyes from the air pressure. Ace, Sabo, and Marco stopped what they were doing when they heard Luffy yelling for them. The three of them looked at the tree where the boy had been and saw that he was no longer there. This time they heard crying from above them and looked up just in time to see the bubble Luffy was in pop. Marco moved his arms out to transform them into fiery wings and was ready to take off into the air, when a movement to his left caught his attention. It was Becky. His division member had already climbed the large mangrove and was halfway up when he kicked off into the air and caught Luffy. The man effortlessly twisted in the air to avoid having the boy in his arms be crushed, and rolled once they reached the ground so their landing wouldn't hurt as much. Once Becky was on the ground and sitting up, they saw Luffy clutching the man around the neck so hard that Becky was having a hard time breathing. Lou, he croaked, patting the hysterical boy's arm. Air. Let go. The three and one other man they didn't know rushed over to check on them. Ace and Sabo had to pry the boy off, letting the man get his much-needed air supply back into his lungs. You okay there, buddy Yoi? Marco asked, kneeling next to his crewmate with his hand on the man's back. Yeah, he breathed out as he rubbed his neck. What was the brat doing up there? Looks like he somehow got himself in a bubble in the 10 minutes we left him alone, Yoi. Marco gave a worried look to Luffy, who was now sobbing in Sabo's chest. It's okay, Lou. Sabo tried to soothe the poor boy. You're okay now. He and Ace repeated the words until Luffy calmed down. What happened? Ace asked softly once the boy was down to only sniffles. The bubble ate me and took me away, Luffy wailed again, causing Sabo to hug him tighter, rocking him in his arms. It's okay. No bubble's going to take you away from us. Ace and I will make sure nothing will take you away from us. Promise. The boy sniffled as he looked up at the both of them with eyes full of hope. We promise. Ace smiled as he ruffled Luffy's hair. Great. Now that we have that all settled, Yoy. Marco called their attention back to him. Who's this? He jerked a thumb to the stranger crouched on the other side of Becky. Oh, yeah. Becky brightened and slapped the guy on the back. This is my old best buddy, West. We just ran into each other. We haven't seen each other in years. West, this is my commander, Marco. Oh, and how did you end up on Sabo, Yoy? I thought Becky was raised in West Blue, Marco asked with a raised eyebrow. After Becky left to become a pirate, I sailed around on various merchant ships to offer my service as a guard. Next thing I knew, one of the ships I was on was headed to Grand Line. West shrugged. Luckily, I fought with Becky enough when we were younger, so I had enough experience to hold my own. Had a few close calls though. The last ship had a rare tiger they wanted to sell here. My contract with them is over and here I am, waiting for another ship to come along to offer my services to. I asked if he'd be interested in joining Pops's crew. Becky grinned. The three men turned their heads toward the sound of a loud growl. Hungry, Luffy said from his perch on Sabo's lap, drool dripping from his mouth. Tiger. He tilted his head to look longingly at his brothers. Ace and Sabo both turned their heads to Marco. Sorry, kid, Marco said, gaining Luffy's attention. There's no tiger on this island, Yoy. The boy's stomach growled once more. Crocodile? No crocodile. Both Ace and Sabo punched Luffy's head. Why? The boy whined at his brothers as he rubbed his pained head. Kids, Marco called their attention. Thatch will be back in time for lunch. Just wait another hour, Yoy. But I'm hungry now. Marco looked at the boy to tell him to be patient, but the look he was given back was just too pitiful. If he didn't know any better, the 1st Division commander would have thought Ace and Sabo taught Luffy that wide-eyed look just so he could get anything he wanted. No, just another hour. He just had to distract Luffy for another hour. Marco heaved a sigh. How about this? I'll get you a snack if you can knock Becky off his feet, Yoy. Here he gave Becky a meaningful look. Excuse me. West said, feeling a little lost and confused. What's with the kids? These, Becky said with a flourish as if presenting something amazing, are our very own. Troublemakers, Marco interrupted. They're troublemakers, that's what they are. Anyway, Pops isn't here right now, Yoy. You can help me train these two while we wait for him. I need Becky to help with Chibai. He jerked a thumb over to Luffy. He's 2 handfuls and a half. I swear the kid can't sit still and stay out of trouble, Yoy. It's not Luffy's fault. Ace huffed at Marco. That's right, Sabo agreed, hugging Luffy tighter to himself. It's not Luffy's fault he's stupid. I would have to agree, Yoy. Marco gave them a bland look as he teased them. I blame you two for his stupidity. Hey, they both shouted as Luffy giggled at them. Marco picked the small boy up and tossed him over to Becky, who caught the boy easily. Nothing too overboard and bare hands only, Yoy, he instructed them. Are you guys seriously sailing with these brats? West asked, disbelief clear in his voice. You got a problem with that? Ace and Sabo asked defensively. West looked at the kids then to Marco for an indication of anything. A trick, confirmation, something. Marco only shrugged and pointed to their ship, where he saw 3 men, who'd seen better days, tied up and unconscious. A few of his division members had to take a couple of their rowboats to dump the dead ones out in the middle of the sea. I suggest you don't underestimate the brats, Yoy. He tossed a staff to West. Don't go easy on them. All right, Sabo cheered. Someone easier than Marco. Ace followed. West turned his head to look at the 3 unconscious men once more, noting their bruised and bloodied state, then back to the kids. I'd rather not fight kids, no matter how strong they are. He rubbed the back of his head as he gave Marco an embarrassed look, before turning his head to where Becky was currently teasing Luffy about the kid's weak punches, only to grab his shin in pain when Luffy kicked him, pouting. West jerked a thumb over to his friend. I'd rather play with him. Oh, no, you don't. You're playing with us. Ace and Sabo cried out as they launched themselves at the man, who immediately brought up his staff to block their kicks. He grunted at the force of the kick, taking a step back to keep himself from falling backwards. The next thing he knew, West was blocking this side and that side, defending himself from a couple of kids aiming to maim him. All the while, the kids still had enough breath to continue yelling at him to keep away from their baby brother, along with other profanities he didn't think kids their age should even know the meaning of. Yup, definitely pirate kids. Unsure of how to handle these 2 fireballs, the man turned to look at Marco for assistance, only to see the commander raise an eyebrow at him as if asking, aren't you going to fight back? West raised his own eyebrow to ask, you really want me to attack them? The reply he got back was a shrug. West ducked an incoming kick aimed for his head as he sighed and hoped the phoenix wouldn't kill him if he accidentally hurt the kids badly. Ace and Sabo both jumped away the moment they noticed the change in the man's stance. They nodded at each other before going back to attacking the man. This time Sabo went behind in hopes of getting into his attacker's blind spot. 5 minutes into the renewed fight and the 2 boys continued beat down. Marco finally spoke up, but it wasn't to stop the fight. Don't just watch with your eyes, Yoi, sense it. Really, West thought it was about time to stop this one-sided spar. These kids were going to end up as 2 walking bruises the next day. The little pep talk seemed to have worked or something, because the kids were getting hit less and less and dodging more. It was half an hour later when the 3 of them were on the ground panting. I give, the blonde child wheezed. Food, moaned the brunette. Marco finally stepped away from his post at the tree trunk and turned to the other 2 grove occupants. Becky, take Luffy with you to fish up something to eat. That should be back by the time you catch something, Yoi. Bait, Luffy practically demanded as he pointed to their 4 captives. Marco shrugged, and Luffy cheered as he dragged Becky over to the captives with him. Moments later, West was startled upright when he heard screaming. He looked out to see where he saw his friend and the small kid laugh as their bait screamed and wiggled to and fro from his place tied to the end of a pole. I thought he was joking, West said disbelievingly. Ace huffed as he turned over to lay on his stomach and perch himself on his elbows to watch his brother fish. I hope a sea king eats him. West looked at Marco, who was also watching the duo out in the small boat with disinterest. He deserves it, Sabo said in the same position as his brother. They wanted to kidnap Luffy. Don't worry, Yoi. Marco placed a hand on West's shoulder. We were planning on killing them anyway. Seems some people forgot that no one messes with Whitebeard's family, Yoi. Besides, we're pirates, if you haven't noticed. We kill if we feel like it. Don't tell me you're not okay with that, Yoi. No, don't get me wrong. It's not like I haven't killed anyone either. West scratched the back of his head. It's just that. I mean ... kids. He really didn't know any other way to explain his shock. These kids are pirates too, Yoi. It doesn't matter their age. They have their reasons to be here. Just don't think too much about it, Yoi. Marco patted the other man's shoulder before walking away to set up an area for the 4th Division to cook. West and the 2 kids stayed where they were in uncomfortable silence as they watched the other 2 in the boat. They were startled some unknown amount of time later when Thatch plopped himself in between West and Sabo. I hope they aren't planning on letting whatever they catch eat that guy, Thatch said as if he'd been there with them the whole time. That wouldn't taste too good. Oh, Ace said with a frown. Can we just feed them to the other sea kings then? Of course, you can. Thatch reached over Sabo to ruffle the boy's dark hair. Marco says they're all yours, so have at it. Just make sure it's not any that we'll be eating. Thatch, the commander looked down at the blonde, seeing the alarmed look on the boy's face. I think there's a problem, Sabo pointed out towards his little brother. Thatch turned his head to follow the finger just to see a sea king towering over the small boat. Marco, Luffy's doing it again. He called out as if he were a child tattling on one of his siblings for doing something stupid, before jumping into the ocean to swim to the pair. What the fuck? They could hear the 1st Division commander's frustrated voice as it came near. West, Ace, and Sabo's eyes never once strayed from Luffy's boat, in fear that they'd miss something. They were only out there for 20 minutes, Yoi. How can they get into trouble already? Then the trio on the ground felt a gust of wind pass over them and saw a fiery blue-gold bird flying towards Luffy. So, West said as he dragged out the vowel, this happens often. The 2 kids shrugged, eyes still out at sea, watching Marco take over Becky's hold of Luffy, who wouldn't let go of the Sea King's whiskers. Thatch finally pulled himself up and into the boat and managed to punch the beast unconscious. Marco insists that we find trouble just sitting in a corner, Sabo said. That's completely untrue. Ace nodded in agreement with his brother. Like that time when we were really sitting in a corner, hiding from Blamingco. A bird just came out of nowhere and took off with Luffy. Trouble finds us, they both concluded in unison. I see, was all the baffled man could manage. Rayleigh joined them a few minutes later, watching the struggle on the small boat. The 4 of them watched as Marco flapped his fiery wings frantically, with his clawed legs pulling Luffy, trying to save them from being dragged into the sea with the Sea King. Becky, with help from Thatch, managed to secure the Sea King with a rope and somehow kept their boat afloat with its heavy luggage. Marco finally landed on the boat, alongside his siblings, and that was when the 3 of them started scolding the poor boy. Luffy, in turn, argued right back at them with his arms going this way and that way as if it would help prove his point. Their bait had fallen overboard earlier and was now drifting alongside their lunch, his ropes tangled in one of the sea beast's fin. Ace and Sabo held back a snicker as the boat came closer to shore. Go of the Sea King, Yoi, Marco scolded. Because, you said catch lunch, so we catch lunch. If I let go, then we has no lunch, Luffy argued. I don't think you meant to catch something big enough to eat us, Becky moaned in his hands. We could have caught something smaller. That'd take too long. This one is better. It's lots bigger and have more meat. Luffy, Thatch, dripping wet from his earlier swim, placed a hand over the boy's shoulder. That thing could have eaten you. No, it won't. Becky was there. He won't let the mean Sea King eat me. Luffy crossed his arm as if that would end the argument. Becky picked the boy up and gave him a bone-crushing hug. Luffy, he wailed into the boy's hair. Your faith in me is so misplaced. Sure, I would have tried, but there's no way I could have stopped that Sea King from eating you by myself. So don't do that again. I thinks you can, Luffy said with his small hands on either side of the man's face. All you do is let go of me and punch the Sea King like Thatch did. Who in their right mind would even think of letting go? Thatch smacked the side of Luffy's head. But if you let go, you has a better chance to punch it, the boy said as he rubbed his sore head, a scowl clear on his little face. Marco heaved a sigh before plucking Luffy from Becky's arms and tossing the boy to his brothers. There's no point in trying to talk sense into the kid. You'd have better luck talking to a rock yoi. But Marco, Thatch whined, pointing to his wet hair, look what happened to my magnificent hair. And it's all your kid's fault. The 1st Division commander immediately whirled around to face the head cook with a scowl on his face. How is he my kid? You're in charge of them, therefore they're your kids, Thatch grinned. Hey, Thatch, Luffy twisted himself in Ace's arms to face the other man. What's mag chicken hair? You keep chicken in your hair. Where is it? I wanna see. They all erupted into laughter as Thatch sputtered about his hair and chickens, doing his best to explain to the boy that he doesn't keep chickens in his hair. Oh, then why do you always shape it like bread? Not to keep the chicken inside. Bread? My hair is not shaped like bread. How dare you? Thatch lunged for Luffy, who jumped out of Ace's arms and ran away, laughing at the new game they were playing and still not understanding what he said wrong. Divided by. After the group finished eating, Thatch went off with Becky and West to clean everything up, with West mumbling about how much the boys ate. Rayleigh eyed the 2 older boys, who were busy wiping Luffy's face. What have you boys learned of haki so far? Marco showed us observation haki, but he used Luffy to demonstrate, Sabo said. We learned about armament too, but he didn't show us how to use it yet, said Ace. We only know that it hardens parts of our bodies and makes our attacks stronger. Rayleigh's only response to them was a grin. Is that so? Rayleigh said to the 2 older boys. It's also a good way to have an upper hand on people like Marco, who can't be hurt by normal attacks. If you come across another Logia user, it'll help a lot. How about a demonstration? Without warning, the coder attacked Marco, who was speaking to their captain. Luffy stared with wide eyes. They'd never seen Marco being pushed back before, or seen any attack, be it physical attacks or with a weapon, land on the man before. They would usually go through the man's body in pretty blue and gold flames. That's awesome. Never seen anyone land a hit on Marco before, Sabo said with stars in his eyes, along with Ace and Luffy. Like I said, very useful against fruit users like Marco, Rayleigh chuckled. Okay, let's get you guys cleaned up yoi. That's all we'll do for today, Marco said as he panted from the sparring match. Though it wasn't much of a spar when he was mostly defending himself from the former first mate of the late Pirate King. Luffy was the first on deck and exclaimed at the new addition to the ship and started jumping up and down on the bubble. Look, Ace, Sabo. Bubble ship. Stop, Luffy, Sabo yelled. What if you pop it? Rayleigh laughed from the ground. Don't worry, just jumping around like that won't pop the coating. Once everyone made it back to the ship, they were ready to depart. The boys looked on in excitement as the crew got the ship ready to sail under the sea. Luffy ran around the deck excitedly as they sank. Next stop, Fishman Island, Marco announced to the boys. What's Fishman? Luffy asked him. Namor is a fishman. Marco looked at Luffy's confused face and tried to explain. They look like they're half human and half fish. A look of understanding crossed the boy's face. Oh, does that mean you're a birdman, since you part bird? That had everyone near them laughing. Luffy ignored them to run up to Namor. We get to meet your friends. The fishman laughed, truthfully. He was surprised none of the boys were afraid of him when they first met. They didn't treat him any different than anyone else on the ship. The first reaction most people would show when they saw him is fear. The kids weren't afraid of him in the same way most people were. At first they were afraid of everyone on the ship. Afraid wasn't the right word. Wary, they were wary of everyone. Not just him. Slowly they opened up to everyone, even him. And they didn't even question the way he looked and just accepted him as he was. Yeah, one of them is waiting for us, he answered with a fond smile. Luffy cheered and ran off again, this time pointing at the various fishes. They made it to their destination without trouble. Whitebeard called the boys over. Don't forget what I said before. We're in New World now. We're also closer to Doflamingo's territory. Stay with Namor and don't stray from him. Do you understand? The boys nodded, and Whitebeard let them go to Namor, who was waiting for them. The fishman led the boys to where another fishman stood in wait. Jin, Namor greeted. Namor, it's nice to see you again. Is Pops coming? Jin asked. He's going through inventory with the rest of the commanders. He said you can give your report later. Right now, we're to give these brats a tour. Jin looked down where Namor gestured to and looked at the 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. What's with the kids? Long story. Pops might explain. I don't know too much about them. Good kids though. Brats, this is Jinbei, one of the 7 warlords. The 3 kids stiffened at the title, hid behind the commander, and looked at Namor as if asking for help. Namor looked at them in confusion. What's wrong? Warlords, was all Sabo hissed. and Namor somehow got the gist of it. Warlords are just like anyone else, like pirates. There are good ones and not so good ones. I'm assuming you've had a run-in with a bad one. Namor explained. The three nodded. If it makes you feel any better, he's like family. This island is under Whitebeard's protection. Jinbei is only part of the 7 warlords to protect his crew, which consists of mostly escaped slaves from the government. Namor explained. Escaped slaves? Ace asked, feeling a little of his fear fading. I'm the second captain of the Sun Pirates. Our previous captain, Fisher Tiger, freed a lot of our people who were made into slaves. Jinbei went on to explain the symbol of his sun tattoo to the boys. It's the reason why Whitebeard turned this island into his territory, so that humans won't dare to think about capturing our people again and turning them into slaves. I owe Pops a lot for that. Help slaves. Luffy brightened up at that thought. That's right. Okay, then, Luffy declared. You're good, not like Mingo. Who? Both Namor and Jin asked. Mingo, the pink bastard, was all Luffy said with his brothers nodding sagely with their arms crossed. Okay, Namor decided not to ask. What do you guys want to do first? Sabo held out his small pouch of treasures. Cash this and buy new clothes. Ours are getting too small. I'm Sabo, by the way. Ace, Luffy, nice to meet you brats. I'm Jinb and was just recently appointed as a Shichibukai, so I haven't met the others yet. No idea who this Mingo person is. The 2 fishmen led the kids to the shopping area after exchanging the treasures for a good sum of bullies. What about Luffy? Namor pointed to the youngest as the 2 older boys made their purchase. Luffy said he'd wear our old clothes. Sabo said as Ace paid. Luffy's a girl. Why would she want to wear your old clothes? Jinb asked, confusion clear on his face. Sorry, Jinb. Namor shook his head in amusement. Luffy's a boy. Sometimes he wears normal boy clothes, and other times he wears dresses. Jinb looked at Luffy as if the boy had a few screws loose before turning a critical eye on his brothers. You let your brother wear girl clothes? Yeah, Ace said defensively. You got a problem with that? He can wear whatever he wants. Luffy looks good in them, at least, Sabo said brightly, watching Luffy go through a rack of dresses. Did you find anything yet? No, came Luffy's muffled answer as he tried to navigate his way out of the round rack. Nothing pretty, he pouted as he popped himself out. It's okay, Jim said as he resigned himself to a boy that liked dresses. Whitebeard had Izo after all, what's another one? There are plenty of other stores. I'm sure you'll find something. What about Criminal? It's a popular brand here on Fishman Island, Namor suggested. Jim nodded. We can also stop by other shops on our way there. After a few stops, where Ace and Sabo bought a few more things and clothes, they made it to the store they were looking for. Luffy stared at the store window for a moment before his eyes lit up and he literally dragged Namor, actually remembering his promise to Whitebeard to not leave his side, into the store. The boy didn't stop even when they were inside, dragging a complaining Namor behind him, with the other 3 running and not too far behind. Luffy finally stopped in front of a man behind the counter. I want that dress. Luffy pointed to the window. The man looked at the boy, unimpressed with his demand. That dress is 20,000 bully. Do you have that kind of money? They do, Namor groaned from the ground. And here they all thought Luffy had no strength. Apparently all those hidden muscles only worked when he was determined to get something. The man looked surprised at seeing Namor and Jin, along with 2 other boys. Oh, why didn't you say you were with Whitebeard? I take it back. It's only 15,000 bully, Whitebeard discount. The man looked the boy over and walked away to bring back the dress in question in the right size. Why don't you go try it on? The clerk led Luffy to the dressing room. After putting on the dress, Luffy came back out with a pout. It's too short. He pointed to his shorts that were peeking out from under the dress. Ace and Sabo snickered at that. You wear shorts under that? Jim said in disbelief. Luffy nodded proudly. You got longer one? He asked the clerk. I'm afraid we don't. The clerk looked at the boy as if he were crazy. If you have to wear shorts under your dress, we do have shorter shorts. No, has to be longer. Ace's shorts are long. What? Ace and Sabo were rolling on the ground laughing at the clerk's reaction, as Namor hid his face under his hand. Luffy likes long shorts. He says it feels weird if he doesn't wear them, Ace said in between laughs. He's a boy, Namor sighed as he explained once more. Do you have something similar but longer? I'll see what I can find. The clerk walked away but not without looking at the kids in distaste. It took a while for the clerk to come back. When he did, he found the boys looking through a rack of dresses, picking a couple out for Luffy to try on. The clerk handed the boy a dress he found with a sigh. A sale is a sale. Do you boys have enough money for all this? Jim waved his hand over the few dresses that Luffy approved. Ace and Sabo shrugged, not really sure if they did or not. If not, we can go back to the ship and get more, Ace said. Anything Luffy wants, Sabo agreed. Jin looked at Namor, who also shrugged. The kid doesn't ask for much. Getting him clothes doesn't hurt. It was a lie. The kid was selfish, and it didn't help when everyone on the ship just catered to the boy. Luckily the boys had enough for the dresses, and the group headed back out to let the kids explore the undersea island more. After a few more hours of walking around and going into random shops, they took a break at a park. Jin and Namor were having a discussion about where to go for dinner when they heard some kids yelling. They only paused for a moment before going back to deciding dinner when they recognized the voices as not one of their trio. That was when they heard what was being yelled. They quickly turned their heads towards where they left the boys to play on the playground by themselves, to see 3 fishermen kids and 2 merboys yelling insults at their 3. Namor felt a little proud of them for not fighting back. Instead, Ace and Sabo gave the 5 fish children a slight glare before getting off their swing, while Luffy looked on in confusion. Jim got up from his seat with the intention of telling the kids to stop, but one decided to throw a rock. Luffy easily avoided the rock but slipped off the swing and landed on his back in the process. His 2 brothers ran over in concern to make sure he was okay. Once he was sure Luffy was fine, Ace growled at the 5 older kids, "Why you?" He got up and took a step towards them, but was stopped by Sabo's tight hold on his wrist. "No fighting. We promised Marco," Sabo hissed with his other arm around Luffy. "Why are you boys bullying these kids?" Jin demanded, standing in front of the 5 fishermen children. "Because they're humans, and humans shouldn't be here." One spat and threw another rock. This one hit Sabo on the side of his head, causing blood to trickle down his face. Luffy stared at the thin line of blood on his brother's face. Ace and Sabo had to cover their ears as Luffy wailed at the top of his lungs. Namor had, by that time, gotten up to come over to the boys to check on them, but even he had to reel back and cover his ears from how loud the boy was. Luffy, I'm fine, see." Sabo physically turned his brother's head to look at him after he wiped his face of the blood, smearing it in the process. "See, I'm still here. I'm okay. It was just a little cut." "See." That seemed to calm Luffy down to just a sniffle. "You boys okay?" Namor asked when he could finally uncover his ears. "Yeah," Sabo sighed in relief. "Just because they're humans doesn't mean you just go around attacking them." They heard Jin say, "We're fishmen. We're stronger than those stupid humans. We should just kill them all." Upon hearing that, Luffy stiffened and turned to give the bullies a blank glare, all trace of emotions gone. Not only did they hurt Sabo, but they wanted to kill them too. He wasn't going to take that sitting down. He was brought up learning that if you didn't want to be killed, you had to kill first. Ace and Sabo recognized that look from when either one of them were hurt during a mission. It was a look that promised a very painful death to the one that inflicted that wound. They did the only thing they could think of and sat on top of their brother to keep him from doing something they'd regret. "Luffy," Namor reached out in concern. "Don't," both boys yelled at the man. "If you come closer, he may bite," Sabo explained as he and Ace stayed on top of a very still Luffy, stopping him from any movement. This seemed to calm the boy down, but the blank look hadn't gone away, so they stayed sitting on him. "Yeah, we should be the ones putting those collars on them," one of the bullies threatened. Ace and Sabo looked at each other in worry as they felt Luffy freeze under them, his eyes now wide in fear. They heard Luffy muttering to himself as he started to vibrate in fear. "No collar, no collar. That's right. They should be our slaves instead of the other way around. We're better than them." The blank look was no longer on Luffy's face, but the look of pure anger replaced it as he growled and struggled to knock his brothers off him. "Damn it, Luffy, stay still," Ace grunted after being kicked in the back. No, no collar, no more. We're not going back." "What's going on, Yoi?" Marco asked as he landed and turned his wings back to arms. "I thought I heard Luffy scream Yoi." That was enough of a distraction for Luffy to knock his brothers off of him. Namor caught the boys before they fell and held onto them as they all watched Luffy muttering to himself again. "I'm not going back. We're not going back. No more collars." He kept repeating, looking lost as he held onto his head. "Luffy," Marco tried to reach out to the boy, only for his hand to be knocked away. "No, not going back," he shouted at them all. Then his eyes landed on Ace and Sabo and saw how they were being held back. "Let them go." Luffy charged at Namor to get his brothers back, but was blocked by Marco. "Knock it off, Kid Yoi." "Look," one of the fishermen children said. "Now he's trying to attack one of our own." Now all the bullies started throwing rocks at Luffy. All the while Jin did what he could to stop them, getting hit by a few projectiles in the process. Luffy slowly turned to face to the older kids, not bothering to dodge the rocks. "Don't hurt my brothers," he yelled as he ran towards them. Marco once again blocked his way by standing between Jin and Luffy. This time Luffy didn't even stop and launched himself at Marco. Marco didn't hesitate as he held his arms out and turned them into flaming wings to catch the boy in a tight embrace. He struggled a bit as Luffy flailed his limbs about to kick and punch, even resorting to biting him on the shoulder to get out of the hold. Luckily, the boy wasn't anywhere near as strong as the 2 older boys. "Luffy Yoi, it's okay," Marco said to the boy soothingly while softly rocking him, hoping the warm flames would help to calm the boy. "No one is taking you back. Ace and Sabo are safe. Namor will protect them, Yoi. I'm here, too. No one will take any of you while I'm here, okay?" Once he was sure the boy in his arms was calm, he turned off his devil's fruit. "There you go. Good boy. There's nothing to worry about, Yoi. I promise I won't let anyone take you boys from us, okay? Whitebeard, Haruta, and Vista arrived to see Marco rocking Luffy in his arms. Marco's such a doting father, Vista said with a chuckle. What happened? Whitebeard asked Ace, Sabo, and Namor. Before any of them could answer, a petite woman with an entourage of castle guards marched up to the group. The woman stopped just long enough to study everyone there before walking straight to the fish children, leaving the guards with the pirates. She slapped each one of the 5 boys on both sides of their faces hard enough to make Ace and Sabo flinch with each hit. Why were you tormenting that poor child? She asked in an even voice. The 2 young Whitebeard pirates were surprised that she hit them before even asking. Because they're humans, and they were on our island, one grumbled with both hands soothing his face. Not a good answer. She slapped him once more over the hand that was rubbing his face and turned to the next boy. What did that child do to you? She. The next boy faltered before looking more confident. She's a savage that attacked a fishman. The boy pointed to Namor behind them. Namor didn't say anything and just gave the queen a slight bow in acknowledgement. He knew the queen would be able to sort everything out. Ottoheim turned to the next boy. And why would this child do something like that? Because she's human. And there goes another slap and another to the boy before him. Not a good answer. Try again. She turned to the 4th boy. What does being a human have to do with anything? Because humans are evil beings that like to enslave us. And another slap. Turning to the last boy, she gave him a slap instead of asking him a question. Just because that child is human has nothing to do with anything. This poor child did nothing to you. There is no reason to torture this poor soul any more than it already has been. She then softened her voice as she brought them into a group hug. No one deserves to be a slave. Not us, not humans, no one. She then turned around to find Luffy, who had wiggled out of Marco's hold, behind her with his arms raised up, asking to be picked up. Giving the boy a warm smile, she picked him up and he snuggled his head into her chest. Sounds pretty, he said as he let himself relax in her hold and fell asleep. Her eyes widened slightly before she turned to walk up to Whitebeard's group. Clean Ottoheim. Whitebeard greeted with a dip of his head while Vista and Haruta bowed. One of our residents came to me while we were patrolling the town and told me what happened. I wish we could have met under better circumstances, she apologized. Her eyes landed on the 2 other boys standing beside Namor. Ace and Sabo stiffened in fear and gave her a stiff bow. Your hand is bleeding, ma'am. Sabo pointed to her slapping hand as he shakily got up from his bow. If I can teach those boys a lesson, then the state of my hand does not matter. She brushed it off with a kind smile as she continued to look at the boys. Can we have our brother back? Ace asked before remembering his manners. Please, and you really should get your hand checked. So this child is your brother. Ottoheim's features softened as she looked at the boy in her arm. You boys are very kind-hearted. I think I will hold on to him for a while. You boys have something to say. Now is a good time while I am here. I believe if it came from you, these children would understand far better than anything I say. She took a seat on a nearby rock, shifted her hold on Luffy, and held her injured hand up for one of her guards to bandage. Ace and Sabo looked to each other, wondering how and what the woman knew. Ace took a few determined steps past the queen, with Sabo following, towards the fish kids and glared at them. Get off your high horse and quit thinking that you fish people are everything. Your people aren't the only ones that are taken as slaves. Those idiots will even use human kids and babies. His fists were shaking from anger at their ignorance. In a calmer manner, Sabo added, Luffy's had less than a year of freedom in his whole life, and he's only 7. We've been teaching him lots of things. Every day he learns something new. As a matter of fact, he didn't even know Namor, who's been with us since our first day of being free, was a fishman. To him, everyone is the same. Everyone is good, unless proven otherwise. Today, you just taught him that fishmen are bad. Seeing the 5 boys flinch and deflate at that statement, Ace calmed some. Not all humans are bad. There are some good people out there. I'm sure there are bad fishmen that live here, just like there are bad humans and good humans. Marco placed a comforting hand on Ace's shoulder. It's been a long day. Let's go home, Yoi. Home, Sabo repeated sadly. I don't think Luffy's ever had a home. Gramps said Luffy was in the middle of being transported when ... and even after. We never stayed in one place for long. He does now, Yoi, Marco said as he lightly turned them around to face Ottoheim and Luffy. You'll just have to teach him what home is. If it is all right with you, I would like to take these children with me for a few hours, Ottoheim said over the objections of the Minister of the Left. I want to teach them that not everyone on this island is bad. I also believe this boy has something special. Whitebeard laughed. That brat is indeed special, but I'm not sure if he can read a person's heart like you. The queen merely smiled fondly at Luffy. Sounds like your kids have an interesting past, Jim said. We're kinda curious ourselves, Vista said with Haruta nodding. I mean, there was that thing yesterday too. A story for the captain's room, Yoi. Marco moaned with his hand over his face, standing next to their captain. I'm pretty sure yesterday's incident was still fresh in Luffy's mind. and that's why he overreacted. Whitebeard nodded before adding to the two boys, with your permission, of course. I think it's best that at least the commanders know what to expect if something like yesterday were to happen again. Ace and Sabo looked at each other uneasily before coming to an agreement. We trust you. Sounds like a lovely story. I will try to bring the children back to you before dinner so that you may have your story time, Ottoheim said before taking her leave with the boys in tow. Divided by. How did you know Luffy's a boy? Sabo asked. I just do. Just like I know how much pain this child was in, the queen answered. Can we have him back? Ace asked with his hands held out making a grabbing motion. Observation Haki, Sabo guessed as she handed Luffy over to Ace. Can Observation Haki really read people's minds? Ottoheim laughed. No, I can't read another person's mind. I can read their heart, especially strong feelings. Yes, it is because of my strong Observation Haki. It's something I was born with. I believe your brother can too. He probably reacted to their hateful feelings. The two young boys were in awe at the sight of Ryugu Castle once it came in sight. They followed in stunned silence as they looked this way and that at the beautiful corals decorating the undersea castle. Ottoheim opened the doors wide with a cheery call as all the guards returned to their post. Children, I'm home. Ace tightened his hold on Luffy and held the small head close to his chest as he and Sabo scrambled to hide behind the queen when three slightly larger mermen and an even larger mermaid swam their way. You two need to have a calm heart, or your brother will wake up in a panic in an unknown place, she whispered to the two hiding behind her. We wouldn't want that, now would we? They both shook their heads and took a few calming breaths. They weren't completely calm, but at least they were calmer than a few seconds ago. Mother, the princes and princess called out in greeting. NNN. Luffy turned his head in Ace's hold and moved a hand to rub his eyes. Musser, was that food? Ottoheim was surprised at the question but didn't say anything as she greeted her children. Sabo chuckled and ruffled the boy's hair. No, Luffy, it's mother, and it's not food. How do you feel? The boy yawned, tired. Once he finished rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, Luffy turned his head around to take in his surroundings. Uo, where are we? Is pretty. He laughed happily, kicking his legs against Ace's sides in excitement. Mother, did you bring guests with you? The merman with light blue hair and blue tail asked as he peered around her at the boys. Yes, I did, Ottoheim replied. These three are children who got caught up in a little incident at the park. The three mermen floated behind her to get a better look at their guests, causing Ace and Sabo to stiffen again. Luffy wiggled in his brother's hold to turn himself to get a better look at them in curiosity. Hi, I'm Fukaboshi, greeted the blue-haired merman. I'm Ryuboshi, said the merman with dark pink hair and purple tail. I'm Manboshi, said the rounder one with red ear-like fins on his head and purple tail. And I'm Shurahoshi, the large mermaid with light pink hair and tail said timidly as she tried to use her mother to hide herself. She then turned her head to her mother to ask, Mother, are these humans? Ace and Sabo gave her a guarded look before Sabo answered cautiously, Yes, we are. No, you're not, Luffy denied. You're Sabo and Ace. He pointed to each one of his brothers as he said this. And I'm Luffy. He then wiggled in Ace's arms, wanting to be put down. The boy then stood in front of Ottoheim and stared at her curiously. What is it, child? She asked. Luffy took a few more moments to look at her before giving her large smile. I like you. You sounds pretty. Luffy, Ace said cautiously. Do you remember what happened at the park? Huh? The boy tilted his head in thought before a frown appeared on his face. Oh, people saying mean things. And I fight with Marco. That's right, Sabo said. You have to apologize when we go back. But right now, what do you need to do? Luffy turned back to Ottoheim. Thank you for helping, Mosser. The last word stunned everyone there, before Ace and Sabo laughed. Luffy, that's not her name, Sabo said. But that's what Hoshi call her. The confused boy pointed to the princess, who was now hovering behind her mother. She's their mother. Ace waved to the princes and princess, not ours. They call her that because ... It's like a dad, but a girl. Do you remember what a dad is? Sabo tried to explain. Dad is dragon. The person that helped make me. That's right. A mother is the other person that helps the dad to make babies. Sabo tried to hold in a laugh at Luffy's answer. Oh, do that mean I have one too? I'm sure you do. Ace ruffled his younger brother's hair. You can ask Gramps the next time we see him. Okay, Luffy beamed. So then, what's your name? He asked the queen. Ottoheim crouched down in front of the boy and picked him up. You may call me mother. It doesn't bother me at all. Okay. He placed his head over her heart. Pretty, but Ace and Sabo sounds better. More fun, make me warm. The sound you hear from them is love, she said to him as she led them through the castle. They care for you very much, so much that even I can hear the warmth from them. You are very lucky to have them as your brothers. Luffy giggled. I know, Ace and Sabo's the best. Ace and Sabo ducked their heads and blushed at the statement. I also would like to apologize. I am sorry for the way those children treated you. It should have never happened, but that is the way they were raised. I am trying to change that. I dream of the day when our people can live in peace with humans. Luffy looked up to see her face. What's human? You are, Manboshi said, floating closer to them. Humans don't have fins or tails and need air to live. We, he pointed to himself, are fishmen or mermen. We can live in the water and breathe air. I don't get it. You have tail. Fishmen have feet too. Namor says he's a fishman and he have feet. No, Luffy, Sabo said. Remember that book we showed you with lots of different animals? Just like tigers are different than lions. Even though they don't look the same, they're still types of cats. Prince Manboshi is a merman, but is still considered a fishman. Oh okay, so it's a mystery. Here we are, Ottoheim said as they entered a beautiful garden. Why don't we have lunch out here? Yeah, food. Luffy cheered as he was placed down on a stone bench under a gazebo. Are you sure? Sabo asked timidly as he and Ace took a seat on either side of their excited brother. We eat a lot and our table manner is atrocious. Especially Ace and Luffy, Sabo thought to himself. Yeah, Ace looked away from them and scratched the back of his head self-consciously. It's not like we ever had a chance to eat with royalty. There is no need to worry, Ottoheim smiled at them. Eat how you want. No one here will be offended. Just, Sabo hesitated as he looked to the royal children in front of them. Don't think that all humans eat like us. We're a special case. Well, more like Luffy is. What do you mean? Why Luffy? The oldest son asked. Luffy. Ace looked to the young boy beside him playing with his silverware and plate. Not paying attention to them, was never raised by an adult. It's just been me and Sabo. And well, you know, kids don't make very good parents. He ducked his head down in shame. My parents forced me to learn things at a very young age. But they weren't very good role models. And the adults that raised Ace weren't respectable people, but they were good people. The problem is that we weren't raised by adults very long ourselves, so we don't really know what we're doing. Sabo chuckled. Nonsense, the queen admonished them. Just look at your brother. See how happy he is. You have given him everything he needs. Love, happiness, and a place in your heart. Mother, Shirahoshi gave her mom a questioning look. Isn't a brother a boy, like Fukaboshi, Ryuboshi, and Manboshi? Luffy is a girl, right? Sorry, Ace was red in the face. That would be our fault. Luffy's a boy, but we let him wear what he wants. Maybe we should break him of that habit, Sabo said thoughtfully. It's already causing a lot of confusion. Yeah, but he won't be happy if we tell him he can't wear what he wants. Not to mention he looks good in them, Ace said to Sabo. Yeah, but imagine when he grows up. People would make fun of him for wearing a dress when he's clearly a boy, Sabo stated. What's wrong with my dress? Luffy perked up, finally hearing something that interested him. It's pretty. He got up from his seat to twirl around and show off his dress. Yes, that is a very pretty dress, Jammin, said a deep voice from behind the boys. Though, it looks like it's seen better days, Jammin. Startled, Ace and Sabo turned their heads around to see a large merman with a scruffy orange beard and hair with a blue tail and a crown over his head. The merman waved a hand over to someone and said something before sending her away. Father, the royal children greeted the large merman and the princess floated over to give him a hug. What's a fasser? Luffy asked. Father, Luffy. It's another way to say dad, Ace explained. Oh, okay. You a dragon then? The man laughed. No, I'm a coelacanth merman, king of Ryugu Kingdom, Neptune Jammin. I thought dad is dragon, Luffy's smile fell. I want to see real dragon, Sabo sighed. Luffy, dragons are mythical creatures. I don't think anyone's ever seen a real one. And dragon is your dad's name. Not what he is. Your dad's not a reptile. I don't get it. Ugh, maybe we should make Gramps show Luffy a picture of his dad or something. Ace mumbled with his hand over his face. Neptune laughed as he took a seat next to his wife and children. You children are amusing, Jammin. I hear you sail with Whitebeard. Oh, here it comes, Jammin. He waved over to the maid he talked to earlier and took something that she handed him. He held it out to them to take. Please take this as an apology for what my people have done to you. I hope it's the right size, Jammin. Ace took the item from the man's hands and held it up. It was a pink dress, similar to the one Luffy was wearing but longer. Luffy's eyes sparkled and he immediately pulled off the one he was wearing to put on the new one. Thank you, Scruffy. It's pretty. He twirled in it. Both his brothers face palmed. His name isn't Scruffy, Luffy. You're being rude. Huh, Neptune laughed. Don't worry about it. I can already tell this one is a little on the special side. Just a little Jammin. He laughed some more. Honey, Ottoheim slapped her husband's arm. Oh, what did I do, Jammin? The big man whined. Lunch came and it was filled with laughter and flying food, but the royal family didn't mind. Afterward, the children played in the garden. The princes even taught the human children how to use the bubbly coral. They taught Luffy how to play tag and chased each other in the garden, using the bubbles to help them float up and around the garden. When it was time for the three to return back to the ship, Ottoheim and Neptune escorted them back. Divided by. After dinner that night, Whitebeard called all his commanders, Jinbe, and the boys to his room. You sure you want Luffy here, Yoi? Marco whispered to Sabo. Not really, but he won't leave us, Sabo replied. I have a feeling that he knows he's different. I mean, there was that thing yesterday. And then the way he acted today. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like he's unsure of himself. He even picked up a fork and tried to use it during lunch. This meeting may help him understand himself more, Marco said, and maybe answer some of our questions, Yoi. Maybe, Sabo said slowly. But Ace and I want Luffy to grow up thinking he's a normal person, not some hypnotized killer or whatever it is. It's okay. He has you and Ace to remind him that he's not just a tool. I know you've heard many times already, Yoi, but really, you boys have raised him right. Aren't we a little too young to be parents? Sabo grinned. Yes, but you're not too young to be good older brothers. Not to mention, the brat already labeled you boys as his parents. Marco grinned back. That was when Ace and Luffy walked into the meeting room. With Luffy now cleaned up from his messy dinner, Sabo looked at Ace in concern over Luffy's depressed look. Luffy took Sabo's hand so that he was holding both of his brother's hands. Sabo could feel his brother's hand shake. Boys, Whitebeard started the meeting. It is entirely up to you what you tell us, but be assured that anything you say will leave never this room. We understand. Ace looked up at the man. We'll tell you what we know. I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer all your questions though. He looked to Luffy, who was staring at the floor. You and Marco already know almost everything we do now. I'm not sure what else to tell you. You can start by telling the rest of us, Thatch offered, though he smiled at them softly. I'm sure most of us already know that you three were slaves before we met you. You don't have to tell us everything if it's too hard though. No, we'll tell you everything. It may make things easier to understand, Sabo said. It's like you said. We were slaves, but we didn't just clean house or do whatever it is normal slaves do. We were assassins. Everyone but Whitebeard and Marco, who had already heard all this, blanched at that. Yeah, Sabo and I were only 5 when we were kidnapped, Ace continued. We had bomb collars at the time. We couldn't say no, though we did try to fight our way out. They were all stronger than us. About a week later, Luffy joined us. According to Gramps, Luffy was taken more than a year before us, so we don't know what happened to him before then. Do you remember anything before you came to us? Sabo asked Luffy. The young boy shook his head. Only member Ace and Sabo. You can't really blame him, Yoi. He was probably too young to remember anything that far back, Marco said. Ace went on to take the stares off of Luffy. We didn't know why at the time, but Luffy was the only one without a collar, and we didn't know Luffy could fight at the time. He was tiny, probably around 2 or so. We did our best to teach Luffy to protect himself when we weren't able to. At first we got easy jobs, and it wasn't too hard to protect him. But the jobs got harder and harder. And well, let's just say we were surprised when he killed those guys without batting an eye. We were sent from one ship to another, doing whatever the captain of that ship told us to do. They were all probably orders from the boss. I guess they realized how close we'd gotten to Luffy, because they eventually took off our collars and gave Luffy the small ankle collar because it's less noticeable and makes it easier for us to infiltrate. Sabo continued when Ace paused. The last one was the worst. I'm guessing he didn't realize how important Luffy was to the boss. They would all beat Luffy to get us to listen, but the last one was the cruelest. Luffy always looked half dead when he was sent back. Who's this boss? Do you know? Asked Jinbe. Joker, both of the older boys answered grimly. Mingo, the pink bastard. Namor repeated what Luffy said earlier, now understanding the name better. The boys nodded. We really didn't know until yesterday, but he wants Luffy back. They tightened their grip on Luffy when they felt him shake even harder, and Sabo continued. Apparently the bastard's been experimenting with making his own army of proficient killers, a killing machine that can easily pick up any fighting style. Luffy is his one and only success. He apparently picked up armament haki somewhere. He was hitting me with a little bit of it, Marco said. Maybe he picked it up from watching you and Rayleigh spar yesterday. Ace shrugged. But haki isn't something that can be learned just by watching, Marco countered. He knows observation haki, Sabo said. Who knows how he picked that one up? That is definitely not something you can learn just by watching. Vister rubbed the end of his mustache and thought. Either it was something Doflamingo did or he was born with it, Whitebeard concluded. Queen Ottoheim thinks he was born with it, Ace said. That would make more sense, considering how strong it is, Yoi, Marco mused. He's able to tell apart each individual aura, Yoi. He explained what he had found out from testing the boy on Sabati. So that's what's been going on, Haruta mused before he clarified. There's been a rash of children going missing. What kind of children? Ace asked. I heard they were mostly troublemakers without families that would want them back. Why? Does it ring a bell? Haruta answered. Sounds like us, but we lived in a forest with mountain bandits. We were pretty well known in Goa for picking fights with the local thugs. I think the reason we were taken was because of that and because we knew how to hunt or fight or whatever, Ace explained. That would be a good candidate, Aizo mumbled to himself. Better than training kids how to fight from scratch. I just can't believe anyone would even think of doing something like that. Thatch shook his head. That's just wrong on so many levels. Jim didn't know what to say but shook his head. Kids, even worse, babies, were taken from their families. Wait, what about your families? You said you lived with mountain bandits. Ace and Sabo looked at each other before they told them of their past and lineage and how they came to live with the mountain bandits through their Gramps. They were relieved when none of them commented about their real parents. And who is this Gramps? Jin asked, being the only one that wasn't present when the Marine arrived. Garp, they both answered easily. Garp, you mean Garp, as in Vice Admiral Garp, the fake Marine hero that's actually an informant to the revolutionaries and select pirates. That Garp, Jin exclaimed. He turned to look at each of the commanders as they all nodded. And you all knew that. Well, it was a very tearful reunion when we called him about getting these kids into some kind of foster care, Yoi, Marco said. And we found out that Gramps is Luffy's grandpa, Sabo offered. Yeah, Fossa nodded. That was a surprise. I wonder if Doflamingo knew that he had the son of the late Pirate King and the son of a runaway noble with a conscience taking care of his prized possession? Thatch said. Well, even if he did, there's no way he could replicate that. I doubt that he knew. Otherwise, he'd keep Ace as a bargaining chip with the government. And Luffy would be used to get Dragon to do what he wanted, not sending them out where they could be killed at any given moment, Yoi, Marco stated. Wait, Jim held out a hand to stop them. What does Dragon have to do with this? Luffy's his son, Yoi. There was stunned silence as Marco's words processed. Before anyone could say anything, Whitebeard cut in. Because of who these kids are and who they used to work under. They are here under my protection, instead of sending them to foster care. Well, okay. You boys sure are one surprise after another, Rakuyo laughed. Monster, Luffy mumbled through his tears. What did you say, Luffy? Sabo asked gently as he wiped the boy's tears. I'm a monster, Luffy repeated. He let go of Sabo's hand and hugged Ace, pressing his face into his brother's body, crying. Ace rubbed the boy's back soothingly. Who said that? Ace growled. Who told you you're a monster? Luffy mumbled something, but they couldn't understand him. Luffy, Ace tried to push the boy's face away. We can't understand you if you keep crying like that. It's true. I'm a monster. I'm strange. I do things I'm not supposed know how. Mingo did something. I don't know what. He couldn't stop his body from shaking. His voice trembled. I'm a monster that's not supposed to be here. Sabo untied his cravat and used it to wipe Luffy's face. Ace and I want you here. We don't care if you're a monster. We just want you here with us. He gave a glare to Ace, letting him know this was what he went through with Ace when he was angry about his blood. Thatch walked over and picked Luffy up, carrying him in one arm so that he could see everyone. Take a good look at everyone here, Luffy. Almost everyone here has been called a monster at one time or another. Hell, most people run from us when they hear we're part of the Whitebeard pirates. What I'm trying to say is, you're not alone. We've all done something in the past that we're not proud of, but it's a part of us. And don't you worry about that pink bastard. With all the monsters on this ship, there's no way he'll be able to take you back. Thatch laughed, causing Luffy to giggle hesitantly. Now, let's get you some warm milk and get you to bed, Thatch said as he walked towards the door. Milk and plenty of sleep will help you grow like the rest of your monster brothers here. Brothers, Luffy said as he perched his head on Thatch's shoulder to look back at the other commanders and Whitebeard. I have lots of brothers. Everyone smiled at the boy and nodded. Still, I wonder where he heard that from, Sabo mused to Ace. I don't remember anyone calling him that. All Ace could do was shrug as he followed Thatch out. The next day, Luffy and his brothers went with Jim to Giantcord Plaza to see the Queen again. Luffy had wanted to see her once more before they left later that evening, and Jim agreed to escort them. There they found Autoheim atop a platform with other people surrounding her, handing her papers excitedly. Mosser, Luffy yelled as he ran towards her for a hug. Mosser, Jim questioned the other two boys. He thinks Mother is her name and can't say it right. And she says it's okay, Ace shrugged. Luffy, she said as she hugged him. It's nice to see you again before you leave. And I see you're wearing boys' clothes today, but aren't they a bit too big for you? These are Ace's clothes, the boy giggled. He say I'll grow big to fit one day. My old clothes don't fit no more, so I'm growing. That's good, she said fondly as Ace and Sabo walked up the steps onto the platform. Why don't you boys help? What are we doing? Luffy asked excitedly. You are going to help me reach my dream, she winked at him. These papers will help us live in peace with the humans. Just help the people put these papers in these baskets for me. It was not long after that one of the baskets filled with petitions caught fire. Soon after, everyone was in a panic as the other baskets also caught fire from the flying embers. People were all over the place, trying to put out the fire and save the papers from being destroyed. In the midst of it all, a gunshot was heard, and Luffy, who had been up on the platform with Autoheim, witnessed her fall. Mosser, Ace, Sabo, and the three princes all rushed up after hearing the cry. There were orders for the guards to search for the culprit, but none of that mattered to the children. Shirahoshi was in too much shock to move as quickly as her brothers. Fukaboshi pushed away the minister of the right, who was holding his mother, to hold her himself. Who was it? He howled in rage. I'll destroy whomever is responsible. Luffy cried even harder at the rage he felt from the prince. He hadn't moved from where he was frozen when the shot happened. Ace and Sabo had to drag him away from the burning flames and closer to Ottoheim's body in the center of the platform. It was only at Ottoheim's gentle touch did the older prince's reasoning come back. She still had enough energy left in her to tell her sons her last words, refusing medical treatment from the guards. It was already too late for her anyway. Luffy, I'm saying this to you also. Please stop crying and listen, she said softly as she felt her energy starting to leave her. Luffy sniffled and crawled a little closer to her so that she could see him. Mosser, you're a good child. I am grateful for being able to meet you and your brothers. Live in the present, live for the future, forget the bad, remember the good. Children, she looked over her sons and back to Luffy and his brothers, before settling on her oldest child. Please, whoever the culprit is, don't be angry for me. Don't lose to your anger and hatred because of me. They all, including Ace and Sabo, couldn't stop the tears from coming, knowing her end was near. In their grief-induced state, they didn't even feel the ground shaking under them until Ottoheim spoke again. Shirahoshi, control yourself. Uboshi and Manboshi did the first thing they could think of to stop their sister from going out of control. They did a strange dance to calm their sister down from her hysterical cries. Mother, Fukaboshi said once his sister calmed down, we'll recollect the burnt signatures, and we'll become great soldiers like our father. Just as we promised, we'll protect Shirahoshi with our lives. So please don't worry. He forced a smile onto his face for his mother through his tears. Luffy tearfully joined in their pinky promise, along with Ace and Sabo. Me too, Luffy said tearfully. I help protect, too. The queen gave the 3 human children a smile. You children are too kind. Thank you. It's just a hair's breadth away. The light of the real sun. It was after all the fires had been put out that Marco showed up out of breath. He flew there as fast as he could after hearing about what had happened, leaving everyone else to finish preparing for their departure, not even sparing time to let Pops know he was leaving. The trio were the only thing on his mind as soon as he heard from the messenger Jin sent. As soon as he landed, he crouched down to receive 3 teary-eyed boys who buried their faces in his chest. Luffy was one thing, but to see Ace and Sabo crying that hard put an ache in his heart. It hurt to see these 3 children cry, more than sending off a sibling to Davy Jones' locker. He didn't know what to say or do to relieve them of their pain, so he just let them cry on his chest for as long as they needed him. Marco swore that he'd do anything in his power to never see them in this much pain ever again. After the burial, the Fishman citizens who came to visit the queen's grave would see the human boys either sitting or lying next to her headstone. Even the Whitebeards came to pay their respect. Luffy, Sabo said softly by late evening, come on, let's go back to the ship. You haven't eaten anything all day. Marco's worried. Luffy had laid down with his cheek pressed into the ground, facing his brothers. Sabo, Ace, he said with a determined voice, even though the tears were evident on his face, I'm gonna get stronger, more stronger, and more stronger, and more stronger, and more stronger, so I can protect everyone. You do that? Luffy, Ace said fondly as he crouched down to pat the boy's head. We'll help you because we have to get stronger too. As do we, Fukaboshi said coming up from behind them. Hoshi brothers, Luffy said as he sat up on the mound of dirt. We will get stronger too, in order to protect what is dear to us, the oldest brother said as his 2 younger brothers nodded in agreement. You mad at me? Luffy sniffled as more tears came down. I was there, and I didn't save her. Uboshi floated over to the young boy and pulled him into a hug. We're not mad at you. There is nothing to be mad about. It wasn't your fault. Yes, it is, he cried and clutched the prince's shirt. I was there. Fukaboshi placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. It's as you said. We have to get stronger, strong enough to protect those dear to us. We're not mad at you, so do not blame yourself. Luffy sat up and wiped the tears off his face. Okay, he sniffled. I'm gonna get more stronger. You should get going, the older prince said. Your captain has been waiting for you. We'll play again the next time you visit. Colette. The day after they left Fishman Island, Luffy was back to his normal cheery self. The night they left, before going to bed, he promised himself that he would do as Ottoheim said, to forget the bad and remember the good. He'd always remember her beautiful sound and her kindness. Now he would challenge his brothers to spar with him almost every day, in order to get stronger. He and his brothers were determined to keep their promise to be strong enough to protect everyone important to them. They even asked some of the crew members to help them. Of course, Ace and Sabo made sure to stress to them that Luffy was not to use any weapons. The older men shrugged them off as being overprotective brothers and made fun of them for that. Even though they teased the boys, the men did as requested and only helped the boy strengthen his muscles. One afternoon, the boys were on lookout duty together in the crow's nest when a small black bird flew by. They were quite proud of themselves when Whitebeard trusted them enough to let them do something more official than cleaning duty. A bird. A bird. Marco, it's a bird. Luffy cried out as he pointed to the bird flying towards the ship. Marco woke up from where he was napping against the main mast, where he was also secretly keeping an eye on the boys, and looked up as the bird swept down and hovered near him until he lifted a hand for it to land. He took the envelope the bird was carrying, and the bird flew back to where it had come from. The 1st Division commander opened the envelope and took out a couple of papers. He looked at them before he smiled. Rather than calling the boys down from their post, he turned his arms into fiery blue and gold wings and flew up to them. Once he landed on the edge of the crow's nest, he eyed the boys' clothes in pride. Izo had the nurses help stitch variations of Whitebeard's symbol onto all of their clothes so that everyone would know who they would be messing with if anything were to ever happen to them. It was also on the slight chance that it would deter Doflamingo from kidnapping them again. "Hey, brat, this is for you, Yoy." Marco handed Luffy the papers. Luffy took the papers and tried reading the top sheet. "For Luffy, that's me." He pointed to his name and continued reading. "Use this if you have ... or need me." He looked at the other sheet of paper that only had the letter D written in the lower right corner. "Was this?" He waved both papers at Marco. "This one," Marco pointed to the almost blank sheet, "is a Vivre card, Yoy. If you lay it flat on the ground, it'll move towards the person it's connected to." He placed it on the floor for them to see it twitch and shift a little to the left. "If you follow this paper, it'll take you to Dragon Yoy." "Dad?" Luffy tilted his head. "That's right. Dragon is your dad." Sabo ruffled the boy's hair. "After all this time, I'm surprised he even remembers you." Ace huffed with his arms crossed and a small smile on his face. "Dragon is a busy man, Yoy. Always on the run from the government and all that. Garp must have told him where you boys are. He must have been very worried for you if he sent you a sheet this big, Yoy. Normally, you would tear these into smaller pieces and give them away." Marco grinned. Luffy held the paper close to him with a large smile. "Keep that safe and make sure not to tell anyone you have it. Dragon's wanted by the government, and he has a lot of enemies. Why don't you go put that somewhere safe? I'll take over until you get back, Yoy." Marco shooed them off the nest. They were docked at an island full of large trees and other greenery a few months later, just days after they restocked the ship. The boys thought it was strange that they would dock at another island so quickly but didn't say anything about it. Ace and Sabo had their hands full with trying to get Luffy to calm down. They'd never hit landfall so soon before, but this could be normal for all they knew. The boy was too excited about going out and playing in the jungle. "You boys can go have fun. This place is uninhabited, so it should be safe. Just remember to not go too far from the shore." Whitebeard said as everyone else brought things off the ship and started setting them up on the beach. "Yeah," Luffy cheered as he took off into the jungle with his brothers chasing after him. They laughed as they swung from branch to branch, making as much noise as they wanted. Once they were tired, they laid on the ground, staring at the blue skies that peeked through the trees. "I wish I was a bird," Luffy said as one flew overhead. "Why?" Ace rolled his head to the side to look at Luffy's wistful face. "Birds are free. They can fly and go anywhere. Maybe you can ask Marco to take you flying one day," Sabo suggested. "Must be awesome to be able to fly." Luffy got up excitedly. "Let's go ask him now." "He's busy, Luffy," Ace said. "You can ask him when we're back at sea. And he has nothing better to do." "Oh, but he's always busy," Luffy pouted. "That's because he's the 1st Division commander. As the captain's right-hand man, he has a lot of responsibilities," Sabo explained. "But I'm sure he'd make time for you." "What's wrong?" he asked when he saw Luffy look towards their right in confusion. "There's people here. 10 of them that way," Luffy pointed. "Old man did let us go off on our own," Ace said thoughtfully, "so they shouldn't be dangerous. I'm sure he'd know if there were dangerous people here. He also said the island is uninhabited and to not go too far from the shore, which we're already pretty far from." Sabo gave Ace a glare. "I want to go see," Luffy said, still pointing. "Why? What if they're bad people? No one's supposed to be on this island," Sabo said worriedly. Luffy tilted and hummed in thought before answering, "Just because." "Fine," Sabo sighed. "But we're going to have to be quiet just in case." Luffy nodded and led them to where he felt the presences. Luffy finally stopped at the edge of a clearing and pointed at all the men who were asleep. There was a mess of empty plates and mugs and the stench of alcohol in the air. "They must have partied all night," Ace whispered. "Hey, look." He pointed to a treasure chest. All three snickered quietly to themselves. They snuck past the sleeping men and stole the treasure chest. Ace stopped just before they entered the jungle and lightly shook the box. "You guys, I don't think there's any treasure in here. It's too light, and look, there's no lock." He opened it up to find 2 strange-looking fruits. "Dessert." Luffy drooled. "I'm hungry. Now that you mention it, I am too," Sabo said. "I guess a snack wouldn't hurt." "Hold on." Ace quietly ran back to grab a knife he saw stabbed into a tree trunk. Once he came back, he cut the orange one in half and handed a piece to Sabo. "Here, Luffy, you can have this one." He gave his search brother the purple fruit whole. "You sure we should stay here?" Sabo looked at the sleeping men. "They're drunk off their ass. I don't think they'll be up anytime soon," Ace said as he brought his half of the fruit up and took a bite. Sabo followed suit. They both nearly spat it back up but forced themselves to swallow it. That was disgusting. Sabo eyed the rest of his fruit warily. Luffy looked disappointed. But that says not to waste food, he said with a look of determination and swallowed his fruit whole. Ace and Sabo nodded in agreement and did the same with their fruit. They looked at each other with tears in their eyes, looking like they were ready to puke. Why would they put something that disgusting in a treasure chest? Ace coughed. What are you boys doing out here? Someone asked from behind them. Wishing we not eat dessert, Luffy said, trying not to gag. But we don't waste food. Dessert. The man's eyes widened when he saw the empty treasure box. Did you eat the fruits in that box? The disgusting taste was quickly forgotten as they finally realized one of the men had woken up and caught them eating their treasure. Do you have any idea what that was? The man continued to yell at them. He then picked Luffy up by the legs, shaking him up and down. Spit it out. Spit it out right now. Let go of Luffy. Both of his brothers yelled at the man. The man's eyes widened at the flames sprouting from both of the boys' shoulders. I think I'm gonna be sick, Luffy complained with his hands over his mouth. Then he face planted onto the ground while his legs were still high up in his captor's hands. What happened? He asked with tears in his eyes. I said, let him go, Ace yelled, before unleashing the most underhanded attack that he'd perfected after his many short years of fighting Goa thugs. It didn't take long for the man to let go of Luffy's legs, and they both dropped to the ground. Luffy watched as the red-haired man curled up on his side and grabbed his groin in pain. Luffy, Sabo pointed to the man, that's how you take down someone bigger and stronger than you. You attack their family jewels. The harder you hit it, the harder they fall. What's going on here, Yoi? Marco, Luffy cheered at the voice. Marco, that guy tried to hurt Luffy. Ace and Sabo pointed to the man. Marco looked at the state the boys were in with narrowed eyes. Luffy seemed fine. Then there was Ace and Sabo. Both of them were on fire, but it didn't seem to bother them. More like they didn't seem to notice the fire. If it wasn't bothering them, he'd just ignore it for now. Maybe he'd get answers from the man writhing on the ground. Congratulations, boys. You've taken down one of the 4 emperors, Yoi. Well, Akagami, care to explain, Yoi? He asked calmly. Akagami whimpered before slowly shifting himself to look at Marco. Seeing the man move, Luffy ran over to hide behind Marco's leg. Marco, the man grunted, those boys are evil. There was a pause as he collected as much of the dignity he had left and sat up. Man, it's too early for this. And that was dirty. He pointed his finger at Ace, who grinned with his arms crossed. It's a little past noon, Yoi, Marco deadpanned. Your damn fault for partying like idiots every chance you get. So, your kid stole and ate 2 of our devil's fruits. The reason for the party last night, or was it the night before? Whatever, he waved his hands as if the reasons were no longer important. Boys, Marco turned to give the boys a stern look. Ace and Sabo looked to the ground, the fire gone. Luffy looked at Marco as if he didn't understand what was wrong. Sabo finally answered, breaking under Marco's look. There was a treasure chest right there, and we couldn't help it, Sabo explained sheepishly. But there was no treasure, just 2 disgusting fruits. We were hungry, so we ate them. 2. Marco raised an eyebrow. And the 3 of you ate them, Yoi. Me and Sabo split one. And Luffy ate the other one, Ace mumbled. Marco sighed in frustration. This has got to be the first time this has ever happened. Which fruits were they, Yoi? Gamu Gamu no Mai and Mira Mira no Mai. Akagami sighed as he flopped onto his back. Your fault for leaving it out in the open like that. You drunk, Yoi. Marco kicked the man's leg. Yeah, whatever. No one here wanted to eat them anyway. Was going to sell them. No biggie. The man rolled onto his side to mope. So we're not in trouble? Sabo asked hopefully. You guys are still in trouble. You were told to not go too far from the shore, Yoi. And here you are stealing another pirate's treasures. He smacked each of the boys' heads, causing Ace and Sabo to flame up and Luffy's head to bounce back and forth. That hurt, Luffy whined, clutching his head, before confusion filled his eyes. No, it don't. Ace and Sabo looked at each other and pointed while yelling, You're on fire. Right. You 2 ate the Mira Mira no Mai. You both are the embodiment of fire, Yoi. Never before has there been 2 people with the same fruit powers. Good job, Yoi. Marco smirked at them, causing a shiver to go down their backs. Now what have they gotten themselves into? And you, Marco bent over to pull on Luffy's cheek. Gamu Gamu no Mai. You're a rubber man. This should be interesting, Yoi. Too bad you boys won't be able to swim anymore. Awa, they all moaned. By the way, Akagami, Pops sent me to invite you to a party, Yoi. You should come and join us. The more the merrier. Let's go, boys. You need to get cleaned up before we can start the party, Yoi. They left without waiting for an answer. Who's that? Seems like you know him, Sabo said as they walked. Akagami Shanks, one of the 4 emperors like Pops, Yoi. He's the captain of the Red Hair Pirates. He and his crew are on good terms with the Whitebeard Pirates. He's very laid back and very annoying, Yoi, but he's also very strong. So, about this devil fruit, Ace said as he found himself aflame again, shaking his hand in hopes of putting out the fire. How do we turn it off? Every fruit is different, Yoi. I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually. Sometimes when you eat the fruit, you just know what to do with it, but you'll have to practice in order to use it to its full potential. Yoi. Once they reached the shore, the boys looked on in excitement at the large amount of food being prepared. Marco stopped them from running off and marched them towards Whitebeard. Akagami's been invited like you asked. I'm sure he'll be joining us. Yoi. I'm going to help these kids clean up. They stole Akagami's devil fruits, just making sure they don't accidentally drown in the tub. Yoi, he explained. Whitebeard laughed at that. That's my boys, stealing from pirates on their own already. Ace and Sabo grinned at the man, feeling proud of themselves. You're lucky it was Akagami and not any other pirates, Marco said. Come on, Yoi. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.